I never thought my sister's twisted strength test would end with police sirens outside our family home. Sarah had always been rough with me, but that Sunday afternoon when she grabbed my wrist and bent it backward until something snapped, I knew this was different. The searing pain shot through my arm like lightning. "Walk it off, stop being a baby," she sneered, while Mom chuckled from the kitchen. 3 hours later, a paramedic would look at my mangled arm and immediately call 911. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant accepting your place in the hierarchy, and mine was firmly at the bottom. Sarah commanded attention the moment she entered any room, her athletic build and confident stride, making everyone else fade into the background. At 30 years old, she still possessed that same magnetic presence that had made her our parents' undeniable favorite since childhood. That particular Sunday started like countless others before it. The autumn sun filtered through our dining room windows as I set the table for our monthly family dinner, carefully arranging Mom's good china while trying to ignore the familiar knot forming in my stomach. These gatherings had become something I endured rather than enjoyed, each one following a predictable script where Sarah's achievements took center stage while my own accomplishments dissolved into background noise. The front door burst open without warning, typical of Sarah's entrances. She strode into the dining room wearing her CrossFit competition tank top medals from her latest event, jangling against each other like wind chimes. Her ponytail swung with practiced precision as she dropped her gym bag onto the antique chair I'd just polished. "Amy." Her voice boomed through the house, making me flinch involuntarily. "Come look at these beauties." She flexed her biceps, the muscles rippling beneath her sun-bronzed skin. Years of intensive training had sculpted her body into something that resembled a Greek statue more than a typical office worker, which she never let anyone forget. I offered a weak smile, the kind that had become my default response to her displays of physical superiority. "That's impressive, Sarah. Congratulations on your competition." My voice remained steady, carefully modulated to avoid triggering her temper. "Impressive," she snorted, rolling her eyes dramatically. "It's phenomenal. You wouldn't understand, though, sitting behind that desk all day. When's the last time you even saw the inside of a gym?" Before I could respond, she grabbed my upper arm, her fingers easily encircling it completely. The comparison wasn't subtle, her thick, muscled forearm against my average build. This was a game she'd played since we were teenagers, always finding new ways to highlight our physical differences. "Feel that," she commanded, forcibly placing my hand on her bicep and flexing. The muscle turned rock hard beneath my palm. That's what dedication looks like. That's what being strong means. I pulled my hand away, taking a step back toward the kitchen. "I need to check on dinner. Mom will be upset if the roast burns." "Always running away," Sarah muttered loud enough for me to hear. "No wonder you're so pathetic." The words stung as it always did. Pathetic, weak, sensitive, dramatic. My sister's vocabulary for describing me hadn't evolved much since middle school, but somehow the words still found their mark with surgical precision. "Actually," Sarah's voice took on a dangerous edge that made my blood run cold. "Let's settle this right now. Arm wrestling, you and me." "Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. You know I'm not what's strong enough, brave enough." She pulled out a dining room chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made my teeth clench. "Come on, Amy, one match. Unless you're too scared." The challenge hung in the air between us like a loaded weapon. I knew refusing would only make things worse. Sarah didn't handle rejection well, especially when she'd already decided on a course of action. My mind raced through possible excuses, but each one seemed weaker than the last. "I really should check on dinner." I tried again, gesturing toward the kitchen where the aroma of roasting meat provided a legitimate distraction. Sarah's hand shot out faster than I could react, her fingers wrapping around my wrist in a grip that immediately cut off circulation. The strength in her hands always surprised me, even though I should have been used to it by now. She'd been grabbing me like this since we were children, always testing, always pushing boundaries. "Dinner can wait," she stated flatly, yanking me toward the chair. Sit." The command left no room for argument. I found myself being pushed down into the chair, my arm positioned on the table, before I could process what was happening. Sarah took the seat across from me, her eyes gleaming with the same predatory excitement I'd seen before every one of her competitions. "Sarah, please, this isn't fair. You know I can't." "Can't what?" She gripped my hand, positioning our arms for the match. Her palm felt like sandpaper against mine, calloused from years of lifting weights. "Can't even try, God, you're even more pathetic than I thought." She didn't wait for a response. Without warning, she began pushing my arm down slowly at first, savoring the inevitable victory. I tried to resist, putting all my strength into keeping my arm upright, but it was like trying to stop a hydraulic press with tissue paper. "Come on!" Sarah's voice rose with frustration. "At least try to make it interesting." That's when everything changed. Instead of simply winning the match, Sarah's grip on my wrist tightened beyond anything I'd experienced before. She wasn't just pushing my arm down anymore, she was twisting it, rotating my wrist at an angle that sent warning signals screaming through my nervous system. "Sarah, stop, that hurts." "Everything hurts with you," she sneered, applying more pressure. "You need to toughen up, Amy. The real world isn't going to coddle you like you expect everyone else to." The twist became more pronounced, my wrist now bent at an impossible angle. Fire shot up my forearm as tendons and ligaments screamed in protest. I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron, inescapable. Panic flooded through me as I realized she wasn't stopping, wasn't easing up like she usually did after making her point. "Sarah, please, you're really hurting me." "Stop being such a baby." She ground out through clenched teeth, her face flushed with exertion or excitement, I couldn't tell which. "You want to know what real strength feels like. This is nothing compared to what I deal with in competition." She yanked my arm backwards, suddenly twisting it behind my back in one fluid motion that spoke of practiced technique. The position was impossible to escape from my shoulder, screaming as she continued to rotate my arm beyond its natural range of motion. Then came the sound that would haunt me for months afterward, a distinct audible crack like a branch snapping under too much weight. The pain that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a white-hot explosion that radiated from my elbow through my entire arm. My vision blurred, dark spots dancing at the edges as my body tried to process the trauma. But Sarah didn't let go. Even as I screamed, even as my legs gave out, and I started sliding from the chair, she maintained that iron grip, still twisting, still applying pressure to the already damaged joint. "Stop exaggerating," she hissed in my ear. "I barely touched you. You're making a scene over nothing as usual." My free hand clawed at her fingers, trying desperately to break her hold, but she was too strong. The room spun around me, nausea rising in my throat as shock began to set in. Through the haze of pain, I heard footsteps approaching from the kitchen, Mom finally coming to investigate the commotion. Sarah must have heard them too, because she finally released my arm, letting it drop like a piece of discarded rope. I clutched it to my chest, cradling the damaged limb as tears streamed down my face. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through the injury, and I could already see the swelling beginning to distort the normal shape of my arm. "Walk it off, stop being a baby," Sarah commanded, standing up and brushing invisible dust from her competition tank top. She laughed, then a cold sound that held no humor. "So sensitive. Can't even handle a friendly arm wrestling match without turning it into a Greek tragedy." I remained hunched in the chair, unable to form words through the pain. My arm felt wrong, fundamentally broken in a way that went beyond simple injury. When I tried to move my fingers, they remained still unresponsive to my brain's commands. The observation sent a fresh wave of panic through me, but Sarah was already moving away, dismissing me entirely as she headed toward the kitchen to greet our mother. The dining room fell silent except for my ragged breathing and the distant sound of Sarah's voice already spinning the narrative to her advantage. I knew with sickening certainty that whatever version of events she presented would become the official family truth, regardless of the evidence throbbing in my twisted arm. The kitchen doorway framed Mom's entrance perfectly, her apron still pristine despite hours of cooking. Patricia Mitchell carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed appearances mattered above all else, her graying hair pulled back in the same French twist she'd worn for 20 years. Her eyes swept over the scene, taking in my hunched position and tear-stained face with the kind of detached assessment usually reserved for spoiled groceries. "What's all this noise about?" She directed the question at Sarah, not me, already choosing her source of information. I tried to straighten up to present my injury for inspection, but the movement sent lightning bolts through my arm. The limb hung at an unnatural angle, already swollen to twice its normal size. Purple bruises bloomed across the skin like spilled ink, and my fingers remained terrifyingly motionless despite my desperate attempts to wiggle them. "Mom!" I gasped out between waves of pain. "Sarah broke something. My arm. I heard it crack. I can't move my fingers." The words came out jumbled, distorted by pain and the effort of breathing through what felt like a vice grip around my chest. I extended the injured arm slightly, hoping the visual evidence would speak louder than my stammering explanation. Mom's expression shifted from mild annoyance to active disgust. Her lips pursed in that familiar way that preceded her most cutting observations, the look that had reduced me to tears countless times throughout my childhood. "Always so dramatic, Amy." She shook her head slowly as if disappointed by my very existence. "Your sister barely touched you. This constant need for attention is really becoming tiresome." Sarah lounged against the doorframe, examining her nails with practiced nonchalance. "We were just arm wrestling, Mom. You know how Amy gets. Remember when she claimed I broke her ribs during that piggyback ride? Or the time she said I gave her a concussion from a pillow fight?" Each example hit like a physical blow carefully chosen to paint a picture of perpetual victimhood. The truth behind those incidents, Sarah's knee deliberately driven into my ribcage, the pillowcase filled with books instead of feathers, evaporated under the weight of their shared narrative. "Please," I begged, cradling my arm closer. "Look at it. Really look at it. This isn't normal." Mom stepped closer, but her examination lasted mere seconds before she turned away with a dismissive wave. "You're holding it funny to make it look worse. I've seen you do this before, Amy, manufacturing drama when Sarah accomplishes something significant." Manufacturing. The word came out as a broken whisper. "Mom, my fingers are turning purple. They won't move. I can't feel anything below my elbow except pain." From the living room, Dad's newspaper rustled with the kind of aggressive movement that signaled his growing irritation. Robert Mitchell believed in 3 things: financial success, family reputation, and absolute silence during his Sunday reading time. We'd violated the third, which often proved unforgivable. "Would you girls keep it down?" His voice carried the authority of someone used to immediate obedience. "Some of us are trying to enjoy a peaceful Sunday." Sarah pushed off from the doorframe, moving into the living room with the confidence of someone who knew they'd never face consequences. "Sorry, Daddy. Amy's just being her usual self. We had a tiny arm wrestling match, and now she's acting like I murdered her." I heard Dad's dry chuckle, the sound that usually preceded his most diminishing comments. "Let me guess. Sarah won and Amy can't handle it. What else is new?" "Robert," I called out, desperation creeping into my voice. "Please, something's really wrong. I need to go to the hospital." The newspaper lowered just enough for me to see his eyes over the top, gray and cold like winter steel. "Hospital? Do you have any idea what an emergency room visit costs our insurance deductible alone? Would eat up my golf budget for the month." "I think she broke my arm," I insisted, standing on shaky legs. The room tilted dangerously, and I had to grab the table edge with my good hand to stay upright. "You think—" He folded the newspaper with precise movements, each crease a small act of controlled anger. "You want me to spend thousands of dollars because you think something might be wrong, me? You're 28 years old. When are you going to stop this attention-seeking behavior?" Sarah had moved to stand behind his chair, one hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. They looked like a Renaissance painting, the devoted daughter and proud father united against the family disappointment. Mom joined them, completing the tableau of rejection. "Your sister barely touched you," Mom repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Sarah, show them how gentle you were being." My sister stepped forward, reaching for my injured arm. I jerked backward so violently that I knocked over a dining chair, the crash echoing through the house like a gunshot. The sudden movement sent my pain levels skyrocketing, and I couldn't suppress the whimper that escaped my throat. "See?" Sarah spread her hands wide, playing to her audience. "She won't even let me near her. How badly could I have hurt her if she's jumping around like that?" The logic was twisted cruel in its simplicity. My avoidance became evidence of deception rather than self-preservation. Every expression of pain transformed into proof of manipulation in their eyes. I'd fallen into a trap with no escape. Suffering silently meant I was fine. Expressing pain meant I was acting. "I'm going to wash my face." I managed needing distance from their collective judgment. "You do that," Mom said, already turning back toward the kitchen. "And when you're done with your little performance, you can come help serve dinner. That roast won't carve itself." "I can't serve dinner. I can't use my arm." The words sounded pathetic, even to my ears weak protests against an immovable family dynamic. "Useless girl," Mom muttered, not quite under her breath. 28 years old and still can't handle basic responsibilities. Sarah would never let a little discomfort stop her from helping the family. Sarah preened under the praise, flexing her arms again as if to emphasize the comparison. "That's because I'm not weak, Mom. Some of us understand that life requires toughness. Amy just needs to stop being so sensitive about everything." "Sensitive," Dad echoed from his chair. "That's always been your problem, Amy. The real world doesn't care about your feelings. Sarah understands that. She pushes through pain, works hard, achieves things. What do you do besides complain?" The dismissal was complete final. They'd already moved on Mom, returning to her cooking while discussing Sarah's latest fitness achievements. Dad disappeared behind his newspaper fortress once more. Sarah sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone and occasionally laughing at something on the screen. I stood alone in the dining room, invisible despite my injury. My arm had swollen to grotesque proportions, the skin stretched tight and discolored. When I tried once more to move my fingers, they remained stubbornly still, as unresponsive as if they belonged to someone else entirely. The family's laughter drifted from the other room, Sarah telling some story about a gym member who couldn't handle a beginner's workout. Mom's delighted response made it clear who she imagined in that story. Dad's occasional chuckle provided the bass note to their symphony of dismissal. I looked down at my arm again, noting with clinical detachment how the purple had deepened to an almost black shade around my elbow. The swelling continued its relentless expansion, and I wondered distantly if arms were supposed to look like overstuffed sausages. The thought might have been funny if not for the continuous waves of pain that threatened to bring me to my knees. "Amy." Mom's sharp voice cut through my fog. "Stop standing there like a statue and make yourself useful. Set out the serving dishes at least. Honestly, the way you mope around this house." Her voice trailed off into the familiar litany of my failures. Too sensitive, too weak, too dramatic, never good enough. I'd heard these criticisms so often they'd become background noise, the soundtrack to my existence in this house. But today, with my arms screaming and my family laughing, something inside me finally cracked as audibly as the bone in my arm. I needed help, real help, and I wasn't going to find it here among the people who were supposed to love and protect me. The realization hit almost as hard as the physical pain. I was truly alone in this house, injured and dismissed by those who should have cared the most. "I'll be right back," I mumbled, though no one was listening anymore. I stumbled toward the bathroom, each step jarring my injured arm despite my attempts to hold it still. Behind me, the sounds of family togetherness continued, Sarah's loud voice dominating the conversation, Mom's tinkling laugh at her elder daughter's wit, Dad's approving rumble. A perfect family Sunday minus one defective component. The bathroom door closed behind me with a soft click, temporarily shutting out their voices, but not the echoing cruelty of their words. In the harsh fluorescent light, my arm looked even worse, a grotesque parody of a human limb swollen and discolored beyond recognition. I turned on the faucet with my good hand letting cold water run while I tried to think through the pain. There had to be something I could do, some way to make them understand the severity of the situation. But as their laughter penetrated even the closed door, I realized with sinking certainty that understanding required empathy, and that particular emotion had long been reserved exclusively for Sarah in the Mitchell household. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger's face back at me, pale, drawn, with eyes wide from pain, and something else I didn't want to name. Fear, maybe. Or the first stirrings of a terrible understanding about my place in this family. I balanced my injured arm on the sink edge, attempting to relieve some of the throbbing pressure that increased with each heartbeat. My fingers remained stubbornly lifeless, purple-black and swollen like overripe fruit. I tried again to move them, sending mental commands that went nowhere, like shouting into a void. The disconnect between brain and body sent fresh panic racing through my system. Nerve damage. The phrase whispered through my mind with ominous certainty. "Get it together, Amy." I whispered to my reflection, trying to channel some of Sarah's vaunted toughness. "You just need some ice and painkillers. It's probably not as bad as it looks." Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were lies. Arms weren't supposed to bend this way. Fingers weren't supposed to turn these colors. And families weren't supposed to laugh while one of their own suffered. But here we were. I opened the medicine cabinet with trembling fingers, searching for anything that might dull the screaming pain. The shelves held the usual collection. Antacids for Dad's sensitive stomach, Mom's arsenal of anti-aging creams, Sarah's workout supplements. In the back, behind a box of bandages, I found an ancient bottle of ibuprofen expired 2 years ago. "Better than nothing," I muttered, struggling with the child-proof cap. The irony wasn't lost on me. A cap designed to protect children from harm in a house where the adults caused it. Something fluttered to the floor as I moved the bandage box. A folded paper yellowed with age. I bent awkwardly to retrieve it, my injured arm sending fresh spikes of agony with the movement. The paper looked official. Medical letterhead from Riverside General Hospital. My good hand shook as I unfolded it, revealing discharge papers from 12 years ago. The patient name made me freeze. Amy Mitchell, age 16. Diagnosis: fractured radius, 2 cracked ribs, severe bruising. Cause of injury: patient states she fell downstairs. But I remembered that day with perfect clarity. Sarah had been home from college for spring break, showing off her new martial arts moves. She demonstrated a takedown technique, slamming me into the hardwood floor repeatedly until something in my arm gave way. The ribs came from her knee drops, practicing what she called ground control. I'd never fallen down any stairs. Behind that paper was another, then another, a catalog of injuries spanning years each with its own fabricated explanation. Fell off a bike, walked into a door, tripped during gym class, slipped in the shower, creative fiction masking a brutal reality. Every single injury had come from Sarah's hands. My God, I breathed, sinking onto the closed toilet seat. How many times? The papers painted a clear picture: emergency room visits every few months throughout my childhood and teenage years, tapering off only when I'd learned to hide the damage better, or when the injuries weren't quite severe enough to risk exposure. How many bruises had I covered with makeup? How many sprains had I wrapped myself pretending everything was fine? A sharp knock on the door made me jump, sending the papers scattering. "Amy," Sarah's voice, impatient and demanding. "Stop hiding in there like a baby. Mom needs help with dinner and you're being selfish as usual." Just a minute, I called back, scrambling to collect the papers one-handed. My injured arm screamed protest at every movement. You've been in there for 10 minutes already. What are you doing writing your autobiography? She rattled the door handle aggressively. Open up, now. The handle turned before I could respond. Of course, the bathroom lock had been broken for years, another household issue that somehow never got fixed. Sarah filled the doorway, her presence sucking all the oxygen from the small space. Her eyes immediately found the scattered papers on the floor. What's all this? She stepped forward and I instinctively pressed back against the wall. Nothing, just looking for pain medication. I tried to block her view, but with only one functioning arm, I was at a severe disadvantage. Sarah bent down, snatching up one of the discharge papers before I could stop her. Her eyes scanned it quickly, and a slow smile spread across her face. Not pleasant, but predatory. God, you're pathetic, she said, crumpling the paper into a ball, keeping old medical records like some kind of victim trophy collection. What's next? A scrapbook of all your supposed injuries. They're not supposed, I said quietly. You broke my arm when I was 16. You broke it again today. Prove it. She stepped closer, using her height advantage to loom over me. Go ahead, Amy. Tell them how your big bad sister has been beating you up for years. See who believes the successful athlete or the whiny underachiever who can't even hold down a relationship. The reference to my failed engagement stung as intended. Sarah had made sure that ended too, spreading rumors about my mental instability, until my fiancé decided he couldn't handle the drama. Another life she'd sabotaged without consequences. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. What did I ever do to make you hate me so much? Something flickered across Sarah's face. Not remorse, but a flash of honesty quickly suppressed. You existed, she said simply. You were born, and suddenly I wasn't enough anymore. Mom and Dad had to split their attention. Do you know what it's like being perfect and still having to share the spotlight with someone who didn't earn it? I was a baby, I protested weakly. And then you were a toddler who could read at 3, a kid who won spelling bees without trying, a teenager who got straight A's while I had to fight for B's. Her voice grew harder with each word. You think you're so special with your college degree and your office job, but I figured out early that if you can't be the smartest, be the strongest. And strength, that's something you'll never have. She reached for my injured arm and I pressed harder against the wall, trying to disappear into it. Don't touch me. Please, Sarah. It's really hurt this time. I think there might be nerve damage. Nerve damage. She laughed, the sound echoing off the bathroom walls. From a little arm wrestling, you really need to come up with better stories, Amy. This victim complex is getting old. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Julia asking if I was still coming to book club on Tuesday. Normal life continuing while mine imploded in a bathroom that smelled like Mom's lavender air freshener. I tried to pull the phone out to maybe call for help, but my good hand was shaking too badly to manage it. Sarah noticed the movement. Going to call someone. Tell them how mean your sister is. Who would even believe you? Everyone knows I'm the athlete, the strong one. You're just jealous because I succeeded where you failed. I never failed at anything, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. You sabotaged everything I tried. Soccer. You broke my ankle during practice. Piano. You slammed my fingers in the lid until I couldn't play. Track. You pushed me down the stairs the night before regionals. Accidents, Sarah said smoothly. You were always clumsy. Still are, apparently. She gestured at my swollen arm, and that's when I noticed something alarming. The purple-black discoloration had spread, creeping up toward my shoulder and down to my fingertips. The swelling had increased too, stretching the skin so tight it looked ready to split. This wasn't just a break. Something was seriously, dangerously wrong. I need a hospital, I said, no longer caring about family dynamics or consequences. This isn't normal. Look at it, Sarah. Really look at it. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. The arm did look grotesque, even to someone used to seeing sports injuries. But then, Mom's voice drifted through the door, praising Sarah's latest achievement to someone on the phone, and the moment passed. "You need to stop being such a drama queen," Sarah said, but with less conviction than before. "Put some ice on it and stop making everything about you for once." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "And get rid of those papers. Nobody likes a victim, Amy. Nobody's going to save you." The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with my pain and the scattered evidence of years of abuse. I looked down at my arm again, noting with detached horror that I could no longer feel anything below the elbow except a deep, burning throb. The numbness was spreading, creeping up like frost on a window. My phone buzzed again. Julia persistent as always. "Hey, are you okay? You usually respond right away." I tried to type a response one-handed, but my trembling fingers kept hitting the wrong keys. After 3 attempts, I managed, "Need help." The 2 words looked stark on the screen, an admission I'd never made before. In 28 years, I'd never asked anyone outside this house for help. The family rule was absolute. We handled things internally, presented a perfect facade to the world. But as I sat on that bathroom floor surrounded by medical records documenting years of accidents, I realized that rule was going to kill me if I kept following it. Julia's response was immediate. "Where are you? What's wrong?" Before I could answer, Dad's voice boomed through the house. "Dinner, and Amy, stop whatever production you're staging in there and join your family." Family. The word tasted bitter. Families were supposed to protect each other, care for each other. Mine had turned me into a punching bag and then blamed me for bleeding. I stood on unsteady legs, catching sight of myself in the mirror again. The stranger looking back was pale as paper with sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool bathroom. My arm hung like a foreign object, swollen beyond recognition. This wasn't going to get better with ice and wishful thinking. "Coming." I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't going to the dining room. I was going to save myself, even if it meant breaking the cardinal rule of the Mitchell household. I was going to ask for help from someone who might actually provide it. The back door offered an escape route I'd never seriously considered before. Every step through the kitchen felt like crossing a minefield, my heart hammering against my ribs as I tried to move silently past the dining room where my family's voices rose in animated conversation. Sarah was recounting her latest gym conquest, her voice carrying that particular note of cruel satisfaction that meant someone else had been humiliated. "Should have seen her face when I corrected her form," Sarah laughed. "Some people just aren't meant for physical activity." Reminded me of Amy, actually. The comparison drew appreciative chuckles from our parents. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, using the pain as an anchor to keep moving forward. The door handle felt impossibly heavy in my good hand, and the hinges squeaked traitorously as I eased it open. Fresh air hit my face like a blessing. The October afternoon had turned crisp, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the last roses of summer from Mrs. Chen's immaculate garden next door. I stumbled down the back steps, my vision swimming, as shock finally began to set in properly. The property line between our houses was marked by a low hedge that Mrs. Chen kept trimmed with military precision. She was there now, kneeling beside her prized chrysanthemums with a watering can, her silver hair pinned up in an elegant bun despite her gardening clothes. At 72, she moved with more grace than I could manage on my best day, let alone now. I'd barely made it 3 steps into the yard when vertigo hit. The world tilted sideways and I found myself gripping the fence post with my good hand, fighting to stay upright. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision like angry bees. "Amy," Mrs. Chen's voice carried clearly across the hedge. "My dear, are you all right?" The genuine concern in her voice nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had asked that question and actually wanted an answer? I tried to respond to say I was fine to follow the family script. But when I opened my mouth, only a broken sob emerged. Mrs. Chen was through the hedge gate in seconds, moving with surprising speed. Up close, I could see the alarm spreading across her lined face as she took in my appearance. Her eyes went immediately to my arm, widening at the grotesque swelling and discoloration. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, reaching out instinctively before catching herself. "Amy, what happened to your arm?" "I fell," I said automatically, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Down the stairs. It's nothing, I just needed some air." "Stop." Her voice carried an authority that froze the excuses in my throat. "I've lived next door to your family for 15 years. I've watched you fall more times than any person should. Now tell me the truth. Who did this to you?" The directness of her question shattered something inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. "Sarah, She called it arm wrestling, but she twisted it and something snapped and they all just laughed. They said I was being dramatic. Mrs. Chen's expression hardened into something fierce. "Let me see." With infinite gentleness, she examined my arm without touching it, circling around to view it from different angles. I heard her sharp intake of breath when she saw the full extent of the damage. The swelling had continued its relentless expansion, and the discoloration now extended from shoulder to fingertips in various shades of purple and black. "This needs immediate medical attention," she said firmly. "The swelling and discoloration indicate possible compartment syndrome. Can you move your fingers at all?" I demonstrated my complete inability to move anything below my elbow. The fingers hung limp and useless like a mannequin's hand attached to my body. Mrs. Chen's frown deepened. "Any feeling, tingling numbness?" "Nothing below the elbow except pain. It's like they're not even there anymore." Saying it out loud made it real in a way that terrified me. "Mrs. Chen, what if it's permanent? What if I can never use my hand again?" She guided me gently to her garden bench, supporting me with surprising strength. "Don't think about that now. We need to get you to a hospital immediately. The first hours after injury are crucial for preventing permanent damage." "I can't," I said miserably. "They'll be furious. Dad already said the emergency room would cost too much. And Sarah, she'll make my life even worse if I embarrass the family." Mrs. Chen sat beside me, her weathered hand covering my good one. "Amy, may I share something with you?" I nodded, grateful for any distraction from the pain. "I wasn't always a gardener in suburban America." She began, her voice taking on a distant quality. 45 years ago, I was head nurse at Beijing General Hospital. I've seen every type of injury imaginable, and I learned to recognize the signs of abuse long before it became something people discussed openly." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I've watched you grow up next door. Such a bright, gentle girl. I've also watched you try to hide bruises with makeup, seen you favoring one side after your sister's visits, noticed how you flinch when someone moves too quickly. I've wanted to intervene so many times, but without you asking for help." "The rule," I whispered. "We don't talk about family business with outsiders." "A rule designed by abusers to protect themselves, not their victims," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Amy, look at me." I met her dark eyes, surprised by the fierce compassion I found there. "That arm shows signs of severe trauma. The swelling suggests possible compartment syndrome, which can cause permanent nerve and tissue damage, if not treated immediately. The lack of sensation and movement in your fingers indicates probable nerve involvement. Every minute we delay increases the risk of losing function in that hand permanently." The medical terms, delivered with professional certainty, cut through my conditioning more effectively than emotional appeals ever could. This wasn't about family drama or being too sensitive. This was about potential permanent disability. "But they'll say I'm overreacting," I protested weakly. "Let them say what they wish. Their opinions won't restore nerve function or repair damaged tissue." She stood, decision made. "I'm driving you to the emergency room, now." "Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering. There's a significant difference." She helped me to my feet, steadying me when I swayed. "Can you walk to my car, or should I pull it closer?" The simple kindness of the question broke through my last defenses. Here was someone who saw my injury and immediately thought of my comfort, not how it inconvenienced them or reflected on their reputation. The contrast with my family's reaction was so stark, it felt like stepping from darkness into light. "I can walk," I managed. "But Mrs. Chen, they'll see us leave. They'll try to stop me." "Let them try." There was steel in her voice now. I've faced down hospital administrators, government officials, and once a particularly aggressive patient's family member who thought his medical degree from Google University superseded my 40 years of experience. Your family doesn't frighten me. We made our way slowly across her pristine yard toward the driveway where her modest sedan waited. Each step jarred my arm, sending fresh waves of pain up into my shoulder. The swelling had reached truly alarming proportions, making my arm look like something from a medical textbook's chapter on worst-case scenarios. Mrs. Chen opened the passenger door for me, helping me settle in and carefully positioning my arm on a cushion she pulled from the back seat. "Try to keep it elevated. We'll be at the hospital in 15 minutes. As she walked around to the driver's side, I saw movement in my family's dining room window. Sarah stood there watching us with narrowed eyes. Our gazes met across the distance, and her expression promised retribution for this betrayal of family privacy. Mrs. Chen noticed too. She paused meeting Sarah's stare with one of her own. Then very deliberately she helped me fasten my seatbelt, taking extra care not to jostle my injured arm. The message was clear. Amy is under my protection now. "Your sister?" she asked as she started the engine. "Yes, she's going to make me pay for this." Perhaps. Or perhaps this is the first step toward ensuring she never hurts you again. Mrs. Chen backed out of the driveway with smooth precision. I learned long ago that bullies rely on silence and isolation. Break those and their power crumbles. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of my family through the dining room window. Sarah gesticulating wildly, probably spinning the story of my dramatic exit. Mom and Dad listening with those expression of long-suffering patience they reserved for discussions of my inadequacies. None of them had even bothered to check if I was actually hurt. "You know," Mrs. Chen said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather rather than fleeing a household of abusers, "in all my years of nursing, I saw thousands of injuries. The accidental ones heal and fade, but the deliberate ones, the ones inflicted by people who should protect you, those leave marks that go far deeper than skin and bone." Is that your way of telling me this isn't going to be easy? It's my way of telling you that you're already stronger than you know. It takes tremendous courage to accept help when you've been conditioned to suffer in silence. She glanced at me briefly before returning her attention to the road. "That arm needs immediate medical attention. But Amy, the rest of you has needed healing for far longer." I leaned back in the seat, cradling my useless arm and watching familiar neighborhoods pass by the window. Each block carried us further from the house, where I'd learned to make myself small, to apologize for existing, to accept pain as the price of family membership. The distance felt like breathing space, like possibility. "What if they're right?" I asked quietly. "What if I am just being dramatic? What if it's not as bad as it looks?" Mrs. Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. In my professional medical opinion, based on 4 decades of experience, that arm shows clear signs of severe trauma requiring immediate intervention. The fact that you're questioning your own obvious injury tells me just how deeply your family's gaslighting has affected you. Gaslighting. I'd read the term before, but never applied it to my own life. It seemed too dramatic, too psychological thriller. But sitting in Mrs. Chen's car with my mangled arm throbbing and my family's dismissive words echoing in my head, the label fit perfectly. "They're going to be so angry," I whispered. "Good," Mrs. Chen replied firmly. "Their anger is not your responsibility. Your health is. And right now, that arm needs a doctor, not a family meeting about how you've disappointed them." The hospital loomed ahead, its emergency sign glowing like a beacon. As Mrs. Chen pulled into the parking lot, I felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. Terror at what would come next. The questions, the examination, the potential confrontation with my family. But relief too, because finally someone was taking this seriously. "Thank you," I said as she helped me out of the car. The words felt inadequate for what she'd done. Not just the ride, but the validation, the professional assessment that confirmed I wasn't crazy or overdramatic. "Thank me by telling the truth in there," she said, nodding toward the emergency entrance. "Medical professionals are trained to recognize abuse injuries. Let them help you." As we walked toward those automatic doors, I wondered if this was what drowning people felt when someone finally threw them a life preserver. The situation hadn't changed. My arm was still damaged. My family was still who they were. But for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't facing it alone. And that more than anything made me believe I might actually survive this. The emergency room assault on my senses came in waves. Harsh fluorescent lights that made my eyes water, the sharp smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with something indefinably medical, and a cacophony of sounds from crying children to beeping monitors. Mrs. Chen guided me through the chaos with practiced ease, her hand steady on my good elbow. The triage nurse, a young woman with kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses, took one look at my arm, and her professional mask slipped for just a moment. I saw it clearly. The flash of alarm before training kicked in, and her expression smoothed back to calm competence. "How long ago did this injury occur?" She was already typing, fingers flying across the keyboard. "About 3 hours." I answered, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Pin level on a scale of 1 to 10. 8, maybe 9. The throbbing had become a constant companion, each heartbeat sending fresh agony through the damaged limb. She came around the desk for a closer look, her movements efficient but gentle. "Can you move your fingers at all?" "Any sensation?" I demonstrated the complete lack of response, watching my fingers dangle uselessly as I tried to command them to move. The nurse's frown deepened. She wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my good arm, took my temperature, pulse, oxygen levels, all while keeping up a stream of questions about allergies, medical history, current medications. "We're going to get you back to see a doctor immediately," she said, attaching a red band to my wrist. "This type of injury needs urgent attention." The red band meant priority status, I realized. Not quite critical enough for the trauma bay, but serious enough to skip the usual emergency room wait. Mrs. Chen squeezed my shoulder gently as an orderly appeared with a wheelchair. "I'll be right here in the waiting room," she assured me. "Take as long as you need." The journey through the hospital corridors passed in a blur of white walls and medical equipment. The orderly, a cheerful man named Marcus, kept up light chatter about the weather while navigating expertly around gurneys and other patients. He deposited me in a curtained cubicle where the sounds of the emergency room became muffled but never quite disappeared. A nurse appeared almost immediately, an older woman with steel gray hair and an air of having seen everything. She helped me onto the bed, positioning my arm on a support with movements that spoke of decades of experience. "I'm Nancy," she said, beginning her own assessment. "Let's get a better look at what we're dealing with here." She cut away my sleeve with medical scissors, revealing the full extent of the damage in the unforgiving hospital light. I heard her quiet intake of breath, saw the way her eyes narrowed as she cataloged the swelling, the discoloration, the unnatural angle of the joint. "How did this happen?" Her tone remained professionally neutral, but something in her posture had shifted to higher alertness. "Arm wrestling." I said the words tasting false even as I spoke them. "With my sister, she got carried away." Nancy made a non-committal sound, continuing her examination. She tested for pulse in my wrist, checked capillary refill in my fingernails, assessed the temperature of the skin. Each test seemed to confirm something that made her expression grow more serious. "Dr. Martinez will be in shortly," she said, making notes in a tablet. We're going to need x-rays and likely an MRI to assess the full damage. In the meantime, I'm going to start an IV for pain management and fluids. The needle slide was nothing compared to the constant throb of my arm. Within minutes, the morphine began its work dulling the sharp edges of pain to something more manageable. I slumped back against the pillows, exhaustion hitting me like a wave. Dr. Martinez arrived 15 minutes later, a compact man with graying temples and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He introduced himself with a warm handshake for my good hand, then turned his attention to the injured arm with an intensity that was almost palpable. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, pulling up a rolling stool to sit at my eye level. "Take your time and be as specific as possible." Something about his manner, attentive without being pushy, professional yet compassionate, made the truth easier. I found myself describing not just today's incident, but providing context. Sarah's history of rough play that crossed into violence. My parents' consistent dismissal of injuries. The pattern that had persisted for years. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd told him. "Amy," he said carefully, "what you're describing is deeply concerning. This injury pattern, the twisting motion, the excessive force, the delay in seeking treatment, it's consistent with what we see in abuse cases." The word hung between us, abuse. I danced around it for years, called it sibling rivalry or rough play or personality conflicts, but hearing a medical professional apply that label felt like permission to finally acknowledge the truth. "Let's get those images," Dr. Martinez continued. "Based on my initial examination, I'm concerned about several things. The swelling suggests possible compartment syndrome. The lack of sensation and movement indicates probable nerve involvement. And the mechanism of injury you described could have caused various types of fractures or ligament damage." The trip to radiology was another blur of corridors and concerned faces. The X-ray technician, a young woman who introduced herself as Keisha, was gentle but thorough, positioning my arm in various angles that would have been agony without the pain medication. The MRI proved more challenging, lying still in the narrow tube while the machine hammered and clicked around me, trying not to think about what those images might reveal. Back in the emergency cubicle, Dr. Martinez returned with a tablet displaying the results. His expression had shifted from concern to grave, and my stomach dropped accordingly. "Amy, I need to show you something." He positioned the tablet so I could see clearly. "This is your current X-ray. You can see here and here where the bone has fractured, but that's not what concerns me most." He swiped to another image. "These are stress fractures partially healed, and here evidence of a previous break that didn't heal properly. Based on the bone development, I'd estimate this occurred when you were in your mid-teens." 16. Sarah's martial arts phase. The fall down the stairs that wasn't. The MRI results are even more troubling. Another swipe revealing images I couldn't interpret, but which clearly meant something significant to him. "You have severe soft tissue damage, including partial tears in several ligaments. But most concerning is this." He pointed to an area that looked different even to my untrained eye. "This is nerve impingement. The swelling and displacement from the fracture is compressing the radial nerve. That's why you can't move your fingers. If we don't address this quickly, the damage could become permanent." Permanent. The word came out as a whisper. "Every hour increases the risk. You need surgery to relieve the pressure and stabilize the fractures. But Amy, I need to be honest with you. The pattern of old injuries combined with today's trauma, this isn't something I can ignore. I'm legally and ethically obligated to report suspected abuse." My good hand clenched in the hospital blanket. "Report to who?" "To the authorities. The police will need to be involved, especially given that your attacker is an adult family member." He leaned forward, his expression compassionate but firm. "I know this is frightening. But Amy, next time, it could be your neck instead of your arm. Abuse typically escalates, especially when victims start showing signs of resistance." I didn't resist, though. I never do. I just take it and hope it ends quickly." The admission brought fresh tears. That's what I was taught. Don't make it worse. Don't give her more reason to be angry. "The fact that you sought medical help today was resistance," Dr. Martinez pointed out gently. "And based on what you've told me, your sister didn't take it well. Am I correct?" I thought of Sarah's face in the window, the promise of retribution in her eyes. She's going to be furious. They all will be. Family business stays in the family. That's exactly what abusers count on: silence and isolation. He pulled up another image on the tablet, this one showing a timeline of injuries based on the healing patterns in my bones. "Amy, according to these images, you've been systematically abused for at least 15 years. This isn't sibling rivalry or rough play. This is criminal assault repeated over years." A knock on the curtain interrupted us. Nancy entered with another woman. Tall, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore paramedic uniforms and carried herself with quiet authority. "This is Jennifer," Nancy explained. "She'll be transporting you up to surgery shortly. Dr. Martinez wanted her to assess your neurological function before transport." Jennifer approached with a professional smile that didn't quite mask the concern in her eyes. She'd obviously been briefed on my situation. Her examination was thorough, testing reflexes that didn't respond, assessing sensation that wasn't there, documenting the extent of the swelling that had continued its relentless progression. "How are you doing?" she asked, but not in the perfunctory way of someone just making conversation. She seemed genuinely interested in the answer. "Scared," I admitted. "Everything's happening so fast. This morning I was just setting the table for Sunday dinner, and now you're getting the help you should have received years ago," Jennifer finished gently. She pulled up a chair, settling in as if she had all the time in the world despite the busy emergency room around us. "Can I share something with you?" I nodded, grateful for any distraction from the implications of Dr. Martinez's discoveries. Jennifer pulled out her phone, swiping to a photo of two young women laughing at a beach. They looked similar enough to be sisters, both with the same dark hair and infectious smiles. "That's me and my sister Melissa 5 years ago. Last photo we ever took together." Something in her tone made my chest tighten. "What happened?" "Same thing that's happening to you, except Melissa never made it to the hospital. She kept making excuses for her husband, kept believing it would get better if she just tried harder, loved more, complained less." Jennifer's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the phone. "The final attack damaged her liver and spleen, internal bleeding. By the time she admitted she needed help, it was too late." I stared at the photo of the laughing women, trying to reconcile that image with the story Jennifer was telling. "I'm so sorry. I tell you this not to scare you, but to help you understand something crucial." Jennifer put her phone away, meeting my eyes directly. "The hardest part isn't the physical injuries. It's breaking through the mental programming that makes you minimize the abuse, that makes you protect your abuser, that makes you blame yourself for their violence." "But she's my sister, and despite everything, part of me still..." I trailed off, unable to articulate the complicated tangle of emotions. "Still loves her, still hopes she'll change, still believes that maybe if you were different, better, stronger, she wouldn't hurt you." Jennifer's understanding was painful in its accuracy. Those feelings are normal. They're also part of what keeps victims trapped in cycles of abuse. She stood preparing to wheel me to surgery, but first she did something unexpected. She took out her phone again, pulling up a different screen. "I'm going to make a call that might seem premature, but I've learned not to wait when it comes to abuse cases. Time matters." Before I could ask what she meant, she was dialing. The conversation was brief, professional, but I caught enough to understand. She was calling the police, specifically asking for a detective experienced in domestic violence cases. "They'll want to photograph your injuries and take a statement," she explained after hanging up. "It's better to do this now while the evidence is fresh and before anyone has a chance to influence your story. My family will..." "Your family had their chance to protect you. They chose not to." Jennifer's voice was firm but not unkind. Now it's time for people who actually care about your well-being to step in. As she wheeled me toward the elevator that would take me to surgery, I felt something shifting inside me. The automatic defenses I'd built around my family were cracking, letting in uncomfortable truths. Dr. Martinez's evidence was irrefutable, years of injuries documented in my very bones. Jennifer's story was a warning of what could happen if I continued down this path. But it was Mrs. Chen's simple act of kindness, her refusal to accept the family fiction that had started this avalanche. One person saying, "This isn't right," had been enough to begin breaking decades of conditioning. The elevator doors closed, carrying me up towards surgery and whatever came next. My arm throbbed despite the medication, a constant reminder of the morning's violence. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't facing the pain alone. Medical professionals who recognized abuse, a neighbor who cared more about my well-being than social niceties, and now law enforcement being brought in to ensure this never happened again. The thought was terrifying. It was also, in a way I was only beginning to understand, liberating. The pre-surgery room felt like a way station between worlds, the familiar life where I minimized and excused, and an unknown future where my injuries had names like evidence and assault charges. Jennifer busied herself with the transport paperwork while I lay on the gurney, trying to process how quickly everything had changed. "I need to document your injuries before surgery," Jennifer said, producing a professional-grade camera from her equipment bag. "The surgical team will alter the appearance when they operate, so we need clear photos of the trauma as it is now." The flash felt harsh against my dilated pupils, each photo capturing angles of damage I hadn't even noticed. The swelling had created deep grooves where my watch used to sit. My fingers had turned a mottled purple-gray that looked like something from a horror movie special effects department. "Turn your arm slightly this way," Jennifer instructed, her voice clinical but gentle. "I know it hurts. Just a few more." Through the door's window, I caught sight of a woman in a crisp blazer, speaking with Dr. Martinez in the hallway. Even from a distance, everything about her screamed law enforcement. The confident posture, the way she took notes without breaking eye contact, the subtle bulge of a weapon beneath her jacket. "That's Detective Rodriguez," Jennifer explained, following my gaze. "She's the best in the department for cases like this. I specifically requested her." "Cases like this? You mean domestic violence?" "I mean adults who've been systematically abused by family members and gaslit into believing they're overreacting." Jennifer set the camera aside, pulling her chair closer. "Amy, I need to tell you something about the next few hours. It's going to feel overwhelming. People will ask you to repeat your story multiple times. You might start doubting yourself, wondering if you're making too big a deal of this. That's normal. It's also exactly what your abusers conditioned you to feel." She reached into her pocket, pulling out the phone again. This time, she showed me a different photo. Official-looking documents with medical terminology and police case numbers. "This is from Melissa's file. Want to know how many times she minimized her injuries? 17 documented instances where she told medical professionals she was clumsy, accident-prone, that her husband was just playing too rough. 17 times. And those were just the ones that made it to official records. Who knows how many injuries she hid completely?" Jennifer's jaw tightened. Each time she protected him, made excuses, took responsibility for his violence, right up until the night he ruptured her spleen. The parallel was uncomfortable in its clarity. How many times had I hidden bruises, wrapped my own sprains, told teachers I'd fallen? How many opportunities for intervention had I deflected with practiced lies? "But this is different," I said weakly. "Sarah's my sister, not my partner. It's not like she plans it. She just gets carried away." Jennifer's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Amy, can I show you something else?" She pulled up what looked like a medical journal article on her phone. The title read, "Sibling Abuse, the Hidden Epidemic." Highlighted passages jumped out at me, often dismissed as rivalry or rough play, more common than parental abuse. Victims face unique challenges in being believed, long-term psychological damage comparable to other forms of domestic violence. Your sister is 2 years older than you, correct, and significantly stronger. I nodded. Has she ever gotten carried away with anyone her own size? Any stories about her injuring fellow athletes at the gym? Problems with excessive force during competitions? The questions hit like physical blows, because no, Sarah had never injured anyone at her gym. She was known for perfect form-controlled movements, appropriate force. The lack of control seemed reserved exclusively for me. That's what I thought, Jennifer said quietly. It's not about getting carried away. It's about power and choice. She chooses to hurt you because she can, because your family enables it, because you've been trained to accept it. A knock interrupted us. Detective Rodriguez entered, and up close I could see the careful balance in her demeanor. Professional authority tempered with genuine warmth. She introduced herself with a firm handshake from my good hand, her eyes already cataloging the visible injuries. Ms. Mitchell, I know you're scheduled for surgery shortly, so I'll try to be brief. But I need to get your statement while everything is fresh in your memory. Are you feeling up to that? I wanted to say no, wanted to claim the pain medication made me too foggy that I needed time to think to figure out how to minimize the damage to my family. But Jennifer's steady presence reminded me of another sister who'd run out of time for truth-telling. Yes, I heard myself say, I can do that. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small recorder explaining my rights, the process, what would happen to the information I provided. Her questions were precise, but not pushy, allowing me to tell the story in my own words while gently guiding me towards specific details that mattered for legal purposes. When I described the moment Sarah twisted my arm, she asked, "Did you tell her to stop?" "Yes, multiple times. I begged her." And her response, "She said I was being a baby, that I needed to toughen up." The words tasted bitter now stripped of the family context that had somehow made them acceptable for so long. What happened after you heard the crack? She kept twisting. Even after the sound, even after I screamed, she maintained the hold for probably another 5 or 10 seconds. I saw Rodriguez and Jennifer exchange glances. Later, I'd learned that continuing to apply force after obvious injury elevated the charges significantly, from simple assault to aggravated assault causing bodily harm. "Tell me about your parents' response," Rodriguez continued. This part was harder. Talking about Sarah felt like betraying a sibling, but discussing my parents' enabling felt like destroying the foundation of family itself. Still, I forced myself to continue. Mom's dismissal, Dad's concern about money over my well-being, the laughter that had followed me to the bathroom. Has this happened before other injuries? Dr. Martinez had already provided the medical evidence, but they needed my words to match the physical proof. So I talked. The broken arm at 16, the cracked ribs from piggyback rides, the concussion from a pillow filled with books. Each incident pulled from memory storage where I'd filed them under things we don't discuss. Jennifer occasionally added questions from a medical perspective. When you say you learned to dislocate your shoulder, can you explain that? The explanation, how I discovered that letting my shoulder pop out of joint hurt, less than resisting Sarah's joint locks, made both women's expressions darken further. "That's a severe trauma response," Jennifer said quietly. "Your body learned to damage itself in a controlled way to prevent worse damage. That doesn't develop overnight." "How many times would you estimate your sister has physically hurt you?" Rodriguez asked. I never kept count." The question seemed impossible to answer. Did I count every grabbed wrist, every playful punch that left bruises, every wrestling match that ended with me in tears? More than 50 times, more than 100. The numbers felt simultaneously too large and too small. Hundreds. Maybe thousands if you count everything from when we were kids. Rodriguez made notes, her expression carefully neutral. "And your parents were aware of these incidents." "They were usually there, or heard about it after. I stopped telling them pretty early, though. It just made things worse." Made things worse how I described the punishment that followed complaints, being called dramatic, excluded from family activities for causing problems, having privileges revoked for lying about Sarah. The systematic training that taught me silence was safer than truth. Amy. Rodriguez set down her pen, meeting my eyes directly. I need you to understand something. What you're describing isn't sibling rivalry. It's not normal family dynamics. It's a prolonged pattern of physical abuse enabled by parental neglect. These are serious crimes. But they're my family. The protest sounded weak even to me. They're your family, she agreed. They're also criminals who've been hurting you for decades. The blunt statement hit like cold water. Jennifer reached over, squeezing my good shoulder gently. The two aren't mutually exclusive. People can be family and also be dangerous. Accepting that isn't betrayal, it's survival. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, surgical scrubs replacing his earlier white coat. We need to get moving. The swelling is approaching critical levels. Rodriguez nodded, packing up her recorder. We have enough for now. Amy, after your surgery, we'll need to discuss next steps. Protection orders, pressing charges, ensuring your safety. But right now, focus on getting through the operation. Wait, I said as they prepared to wheel me out. What happens to them, to Sarah? Rodriguez and Jennifer exchanged another look, some silent communication I couldn't interpret. Finally, Rodriguez answered. That depends partly on you and what you decide to do moving forward. But based on the evidence Dr. Martinez has shown me and your statement, we have grounds for arrest. The video from your cousin that was mentioned would strengthen the case significantly. Video. Emma. I'd forgotten about my younger cousin away at college, but always watching, always worried. She really recorded things. According to what you told us, yes. We'll be reaching out to her. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. Amy, I know this feels like you're destroying your family, but you didn't create this situation. You're just finally allowing consequences for actions that should have had consequences years ago. As they wheeled me towards surgery, Jennifer walked alongside her presence, steadier than my own heartbeat. I'll be here when you wake up, she promised. And Amy, you did the right thing. Melissa never got the chance to speak her truth while it could still make a difference. You're doing what she couldn't. The operating room doors loomed ahead, bright lights visible through the windows. Beyond them lay not just surgery, but a complete upheaval of the life I'd known. No more Sunday dinners where I was the punchline. No more holidays spent trying to avoid Sarah's playful attacks. No more pretending that love meant accepting violence. I'm scared, I admitted as they prepared to transfer me to the operating table. Good, Jennifer said firmly. Fear means you understand the situation is serious. But Amy, you've survived 28 years of abuse. You can survive the truth coming to light. The anesthesia mask descended, and with it came a strange sense of release. For the first time in my life, I'd told the complete truth about my family. Whatever came next, that truth was now out in the world, documented and witnessed by people who believed me. As consciousness faded, I held on to Jennifer's last words. Survival was possible. Melissa had proven what happened without intervention, but I still had a chance to write a different ending. The darkness that took me was nothing like the suffocating silence I'd lived in for so long. This was temporary, medical, purposeful. When I woke, everything would be different. And for the first time in 28 years, that thought brought relief instead of terror. Surgery existed in fragments, the cold of the operating room, voices speaking medical terminology that floated past like clouds, the blessed absence of pain as anesthesia worked its magic. When consciousness returned, it came slowly like swimming up from deep water toward a surface that kept moving further away. The recovery room materialized in stages. First came the rhythmic beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell that marked every corner of the hospital, and finally the visual pieces. Pale walls, industrial ceiling tiles, and a figure in dark clothing sitting beside my bed. Detective Rodriguez looked up from her notebook as I stirred, offering a small smile that somehow made her seem less intimidating than before. My arm lay immobilized in a complex arrangement of pins and external fixation devices that looked like something from a science fiction movie. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. "Fuzzy." I managed my throat dry as sandpaper. Did it work? The surgery? Dr. Martinez said it went well. They had to decompress the nerve and stabilize multiple fractures, but he's optimistic about recovery. You'll need extensive physical therapy, but with time and work, you should regain most, if not all, function. Most, if not all. The qualifier sat heavy between us, a reminder of how close I'd come to permanent disability, because I'd waited 3 hours to seek help. "Your friend Jennifer stayed until you were out of surgery," Rodriguez continued. "She had to return to work but left her number for you, and Mrs. Chen is in the waiting room. I told her family only for now, but she informed me in no uncertain terms that chosen family counts." The thought of Mrs. Chen facing down hospital bureaucracy on my behalf brought the first smile I'd managed all day. She doesn't take no for an answer. I noticed. Rodriguez shifted in her chair, becoming more businesslike. "Amy, I need to update you on some developments. Are you alert enough for that?" The monitors betrayed my spike of anxiety with quickening beeps. "My family..." "We executed a warrant at your family home about 2 hours ago. Your sister was placed under arrest for aggravated assault. Your parents were brought in for questioning regarding negligent supervision and failure to provide medical care." The words hit harder than any physical blow Sarah had ever delivered. Arrested. My sister was in jail because of me. My parents were being questioned by police because I'd finally told the truth. The family portrait we'd presented to the world for decades had shattered in a single afternoon. "I know this is difficult," Rodriguez said gently, "but I need you to understand that these charges aren't arbitrary. The medical evidence Dr. Martinez documented shows a pattern of abuse spanning years. Your statement corroborates that evidence. And Amy, there's something else." She pulled out her tablet, swiping to what looked like video stills. "Your cousin Emma came to the station voluntarily after hearing about the arrests. She brought external hard drives containing dozens of videos spanning the past 2 years. The screen showed a familiar scene. Our dining room shot from an angle that suggested Emma's phone propped discreetly against something. The timestamp read 3 months ago. Even in the still image, I could see Sarah's hand gripping my wrist, my face contorted in pain while our parents looked on with indifference. "She has videos of multiple incidents," Rodriguez continued, "including today's assault. The entire thing. The forced arm wrestling, the twisting the crack of your bone, your parents laughing while you begged for help. It's all there in high definition." "Emma did that." My voice came out small wondering. My younger cousin, quiet and studious, who I'd thought barely noticed the family dynamics. "She's been documenting everything she could, waiting for the right moment to act. She told us she tried to report once before during high school, but no one took her seriously without you corroborating the abuse." Rodriguez swiped to another image. Emma at the police station, looking young but determined. "She's been carrying the weight of witnessing this for years, Amy. Today, when she heard you finally got help, she said it felt like permission to share what she'd seen. I thought about Emma at family gatherings, always fiddling with her phone, always positioned where she could see everything. I'd assumed she was just another millennial glued to technology. Instead, she'd been gathering evidence, preparing for a day when someone would finally listen. Your sister's reaction to the arrest was instructive," Rodriguez continued carefully. "She initially laughed, telling officers it was a misunderstanding. When she realized we were serious, she became verbally aggressive. She had to be physically restrained when she tried to assault one of my officers. She attacked a police officer." The monitors spiked again. "Attempted to. She seemed genuinely shocked that her strength and intimidation tactics didn't work on trained law enforcement." Rodriguez's expression suggested this wasn't uncommon in domestic violence cases. Your parents' reactions were different, but equally telling. Your mother immediately began crying about family reputation and what the neighbors would think. Your father threatened to sue everyone involved. That sounds like them. The pain medication made everything feel distant, like I was watching someone else's life implode from a safe distance. What did Sarah say about what she did? Rodriguez consulted her notes. Quote, Amy's always been weak. I was trying to toughen her up. It's not my fault she can't handle a little rough play. When shown the medical evidence of your previous injuries, she said, those were accidents. Amy's clumsy. And my parents, your mother claimed she thought you were exaggerating. Your father said, and I quote, girls will be girls. Sarah's just more physical than Amy. We never thought it was serious. Rodriguez's tone suggested what she thought of those excuses. However, when we showed them the video evidence, their stories began to change. Suddenly, they remembered being concerned, but not knowing how to handle the situation. A knock interrupted us. A woman in a rumpled business suit entered, looking harried but kind. She introduced herself as Janet Williams from the prosecutor's office, apologizing for her appearance. She'd been pulled from her son's soccer game when the case landed on her desk. I've reviewed the initial evidence, she said, pulling up a chair on my other side. Amy, I want to be direct with you. This is one of the most clear-cut abuse cases I've seen. The medical documentation, video evidence, and witness statements create an overwhelming picture. But I need to know, are you willing to testify? The question I'd been dreading. Testifying meant facing Sarah in court, looking my parents in the eye while describing their failures. It meant making the private horror of my childhood public record. I don't know if I'm strong enough, I admitted. Can I show you something? Janet pulled out her phone, scrolling to what looked like an email. This came to the police department about an hour ago. Word travels fast in communities. She handed me the phone. The email was from someone named Marcus Thompson. I was Sarah Mitchell's classmate in high school. I just heard about her arrest. I've wanted to say something for years, but didn't think anyone would believe me. I saw her hurt her sister multiple times at school events. Once at a track meet, she twisted Amy's ankle so badly that Amy couldn't compete. Sarah laughed about it after. If you need witnesses to establish pattern behavior, I'll testify. There are 12 more like this, Janet said quietly. Teachers, neighbors, family friends, people who saw what was happening but didn't know how to intervene without your cooperation. Your speaking up has given them permission to share what they witnessed. I scrolled through the emails, each one a validation I'd never expected. My 10th grade English teacher describing essays about pain I'd written, the parent volunteer who'd seen Sarah slam me into lockers, the family friend who'd noticed I always wore long sleeves in summer. They saw, I whispered, all these people saw. Abuse thrives in silence and isolation, Rodriguez said. Your family counted on social politeness and the bystander effect to keep their secret. But once one person speaks up, others often follow. What would testifying involve? I asked, returning Janet's phone. You'd need to describe the pattern of abuse, specific incidents, the impact on your life. It won't be easy. The defense will try to minimize the abuse, paint it as normal sibling conflict. They'll attack your credibility, suggest you're exaggerating or vindictive. Janet's honesty was brutal but necessary. But Amy, you'll have support, victim advocates, counseling services, and what looks like an entire community ready to corroborate your experiences. Can I think about it? Of course, but I should tell you, with or without your testimony, we have enough to proceed with charges. The video evidence alone is damning. Your participation would strengthen the case significantly, but this isn't all on your shoulders. After they left, promising to return tomorrow, I lay in the medicated haze trying to process everything. Sarah in a jail cell, my parents in interrogation rooms, Emma finally able to share her recordings, strangers from my past volunteering to speak truths that had been silenced for decades. My phone plugged in beside the bed showed dozens of messages. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize. Extended family members who'd heard the news, former classmates expressing support, Julia and my book club friends offering everything from hospital visits to places to stay if I needed distance from my family home. But 3 messages stood out. From Emma. I'm so proud of you for finally getting help. I have everything saved in multiple places. She won't hurt you again. I love you. From an unknown number that identified itself as Sarah's gym. This is CrossFit Apex Management. We've terminated Sarah Mitchell's membership and employment effective immediately. We've also begun reviewing past incident reports that were dismissed. You're not the only person she's hurt. From Mom. How could you do this to our family? Sarah is in jail. The police took your father for questioning. The neighbors saw everything. You've destroyed us. I stared at that last message for a long time. Mom was right about one thing. I had destroyed something. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect Mitchell family was rubble. But beneath the destruction, something else was emerging. Truth. Support. The possibility of a life where Sunday dinners didn't end in bruises. Dr. Martinez appeared for evening rounds, checking my surgical sites and reviewing the procedure's success. The nerve decompression went perfectly, he assured me. With proper therapy, I expect you'll regain full function. You got here just in time. What would have happened if I'd waited longer? His expression grew serious. Compartment syndrome can cause tissue death within hours. Compressed nerves can suffer permanent damage. If you'd followed your family's advice to walk it off, you might have lost the use of your hand entirely. Or worse, untreated compartment syndrome can lead to kidney failure, even death in extreme cases. Death. Sarah's toughening up session could have killed me, and my parents would have let it happen rather than pay an emergency room bill. I've seen a lot of abuse injuries, Dr. Martinez continued, but the systematic nature of yours, the documentation spanning years. Amy, you survived something that could have easily become a tragedy. That takes incredible strength. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm betraying my family. You're not betraying them. You're holding them accountable for betraying you. He adjusted my IV drip, checking the pain medication levels. Healing isn't just about your arm. It's about breaking the cycle that allowed this to happen. As he left, I thought about cycles. Mom had mentioned once in an unguarded moment that her own mother had been strict. Dad's father had believed in discipline. Had Sarah learned violence as a generational inheritance, each family passing down their poison like a twisted heirloom? But Emma had broken the pattern. She'd seen the violence and chosen to document rather than perpetuate it. The teachers who'd emailed had noticed rather than ignored. Mrs. Chen had acted rather than minded her own business. Even Jennifer, carrying her own grief about her sister, had chosen to intervene rather than remain silent. And me, for 28 years, I'd been the perfect victim. Silent, compliant, accepting blame for my own abuse. Today I'd broken that pattern with 3 simple words. I need help. The hospital room felt like a cocoon, safe and separated from the chaos my truth-telling had unleashed. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more decisions, more consequences. But tonight, for the first time in my life, I could close my eyes without wondering when the next attack would come. Sarah was in jail. My parents were facing consequences. The truth was documented, witnessed, believed. The girl who'd learned to dislocate her own shoulder to minimize damage was finally safe. It shouldn't have taken a broken arm and potential permanent disability to reach this point. But as I drifted off to medicated sleep, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 28 years. Protected. The news notification lit up my phone screen at 6:43 a.m., jerking me from the restless doze that passed for sleep in hospitals. Local fitness instructor arrested for assault, family violence exposed. Sarah's professional headshot stared back at me from the article, her confident smile now carrying sinister undertones. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the article. Reporter Michelle Reyes had done her homework connecting Sarah's arrest to her position as a celebrated trainer at CrossFit Apex. The gym's statement distanced themselves completely, mentioning reviewing past complaints that may have been inadequately addressed. Comments were already piling up, some defending Sarah, others sharing their own uncomfortable experiences with her aggressive training style. The hospital room door burst open without warning, making me jump hard enough to jostle my immobilized arm. Mom stood in the doorway, her usually perfect appearance in disarray. Her silk blouse was wrinkled makeup-smeared hair escaping from her signature French twist. Behind her, Dad looked equally disheveled, his golf polo stained with what might have been coffee. "How dare you?" Mom hissed, advancing into the room like an avenging angel. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Ma'am, visiting hours don't start until 8, a nurse said firmly from behind them, "and you're not on the approved visitor list." "I'm her mother." Mom snapped, not even glancing at the nurse. "I have every right to see what dramatics she's orchestrated now." "Actually, you don't." Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Her timing seemed almost supernatural, but I later learned the hospital had called her the moment my parents signed in at the front desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you're both under strict orders not to contact the victim while the investigation is ongoing." Victim. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "She's not a victim. She's a manipulative little attention seeker who's destroying our family because her sister is more successful." Rodriguez pulled out her phone, making a show of starting a recording. "Please continue. Everything you say can and will be used in the ongoing investigation." That stopped Dad mid-rant, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Mom, however, was too far gone to care about legal consequences. 28 years we've fed her, clothed her, given her everything. She spat, tears streaming down her face. "And this is how she repays us, by having Sarah arrested, by humiliating us in front of the entire community. Margaret Chen won't even look at me anymore. The country club called to discuss our membership status. Your daughter suffered multiple fractures and near-permanent nerve damage," Rodriguez said evenly. "Your response is to worry about country club membership." "She's exaggerating as always," Mom insisted, but her voice wavered as she caught sight of my arm in its external fixation device. The metal pins and rods made it impossible to minimize the injury as minor. Sarah barely touched her. It was just arm wrestling. "We have video evidence suggesting otherwise," Rodriguez informed them. "Your niece, Emma, was quite thorough in her documentation." The mention of Emma changed everything. Mom's face went white and Dad actually took a step backward. "Emma," Mom whispered. "Little Emma recorded—" 2 years' worth of systematic abuse, Rodriguez confirmed, including yesterday's assault. The audio is particularly damning. Amy begging Sarah to stop the crack of breaking bone, and both of you laughing while she cried in pain." "We didn't know it was that serious," Dad said quickly, the legal implications finally penetrating his anger. "Sarah's always been physical. We thought it was just rough play." Rough play that resulted in a fractured radius at age 16, cracked ribs at 14, a concussion at 12. Rodriguez consulted her notebook with theatrical precision. All injuries that coincidentally occurred during Sarah's visits home from various schools and programs. Injuries you never properly treated, instead accepting whatever story Sarah provided. "You don't understand," Mom said desperately. "Sarah is special. She's an athlete, she's strong, she's going places. Amy—" She looked at me with such disappointment it took my breath away. "Amy was supposed to be grateful. Sarah tried to include her to help her be less pathetic. By breaking her bones, Rodriguez's voice could have frozen fire. It wasn't like that." Mom's carefully constructed composure finally shattered completely. My mother. She had her ways of maintaining discipline. Physical correction was normal. Sarah learned that strength matters, that weakness needs to be corrected. We thought she was helping Amy toughen up. The generational revelation hung in the air like smoke. Behind the perfect suburban mother facade, Patricia Mitchell was just another link in a chain of abuse teaching her daughters that violence was love and pain built character. "And you—" Rodriguez turned to my father. "What's your excuse?" Dad's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "I worked 70 hours a week to provide for this family. I trusted Patricia to handle the girls. When Amy complained, it always seemed like she was being oversensitive. Sarah was thriving, winning competitions, making us proud. Amy was—" He gestured vaguely at me. "Adequate. We figured Sarah was trying to motivate her. Motivate her by breaking her bones." Rodriguez's repetition of the fact seemed designed to prevent them from sliding back into euphemism. "We want a lawyer," Dad said suddenly. "We're not saying anything else without representation." "Excellent idea," Rodriguez agreed. "But first, let me make something crystal clear. You're both under investigation for child neglect and endangerment. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on several incidents. Your daughter nearly lost permanent use of her hand because you refused medical care. A judge has issued a restraining order preventing any contact with Amy during the investigation." She handed them official documents which Dad accepted with shaking hands. Mom had progressed to ugly, sobbing mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "Sarah's in jail," Mom wailed. "Our baby is in a cell with criminals and addicts because of her." She jabbed a finger at me. "I hope you're happy. I hope destroying your sister's life makes you feel important." "Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter is in jail because she committed aggravated assault," Rodriguez corrected firmly. "She's facing potential prison time because she chose to torture her sister for decades while you watched and enabled it." Prison. The word emerged as barely a whisper from Dad's bloodless lips. "But she has a career. She has a future." "She should have thought of that before breaking bones for fun," Rodriguez replied without sympathy. A commotion in the hallway drew everyone's attention. Sarah's voice, loud and demanding, carried clearly. "I don't care about bail conditions. That's my sister in there. I have a right to see her." Two officers struggled to restrain her as she fought against their grip. Even in Orange County jail clothes, Sarah radiated dangerous energy. Her hair hung loose and wild, her face contorted with rage. When she saw our parents, she stopped struggling. "Mom, Dad, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them Amy's lying like she always does." Her voice cracked with desperation. "I was just playing. She knows I was just playing." "Sarah, honey." Mom started toward her, but an officer blocked her path. "No contact with co-defendants," he stated firmly. Sarah's attention shifted to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not remorse or concern for my injury, just raw fear for herself. "Amy, tell them the truth," she pleaded. "Tell them you're overreacting. You always overreact. Remember when you thought I broke your ribs, but they were just bruised. Remember when you said I gave you a concussion, but it was just a headache." "The medical records show 2 cracked ribs and a grade 3 concussion," Rodriguez interjected smoothly. "Would you like to revise your statement, Miss Mitchell?" Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. The controlled athlete disappeared, replaced by someone I'd seen in glimpses throughout our childhood. Cruel, entitled, and utterly without empathy. "This is your fault," she snarled at me. "You've always been jealous, always trying to make me look bad because you could never measure up. So what if I played a little rough? You needed it. You were soft, weak, pathetic. Someone had to make you stronger. By breaking my bones, I found my voice at last weak but steady. By twisting my arm until it snapped." "You're so dramatic," Sarah spat. "It wasn't that bad. You're milking this for attention like you always do." Rodriguez stepped forward, positioning herself between Sarah and my bed. "Miss Mitchell, are you confessing to the assault?" "I'm saying she needed to be taught a lesson about weakness," Sarah declared, too angry to recognize the trap. "If she wasn't such a baby about every little thing—" "That's enough." Rodriguez nodded to the officers. "Get her back to holding, and add witness intimidation to her charges." As they dragged Sarah away, she kept shouting. Threats, accusations, promises of retribution that grew fainter with distance. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms, sobbing about her poor baby and the injustice of it all. Neither of them looked at me. "I think it's time for you both to leave," Rodriguez said firmly. "And remember, any attempt to contact Amy directly or through third parties will result in immediate arrest. This includes phone calls, texts, emails, or showing up at her home or workplace." Dad pulled Mom toward the door, but she twisted back for one last volley. "You've destroyed this family, Amy. Sarah's career is ruined. Our reputation is garbage. I'll never forgive you for this. Never." The door closed behind them with a decisive click, leaving me alone with Rodriguez and the echoing silence of their absence. No concern for my injury, no acknowledgement of the years of pain, just rage that I'd finally refused to be their sacrificial lamb. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," Rodriguez said quietly, "but in a way it's helpful for the case. Their complete lack of remorse or concern for your well-being speaks volumes. They really don't think they did anything wrong." The realization hit like a physical blow. Even now, even with all the evidence, they think I'm the problem. It's a common pattern in abuse cases. Admitting wrongdoing would mean confronting their own failures and complicity. It's easier to blame the victim. She pulled up a chair, her expression softening. "How are you feeling?" "Like I just watched my family die," I admitted. "Which is stupid because they've been gone for years, haven't they? The family I wanted, the parents who would protect me, the sister who would love me, they never existed." "Grief for what should have been is real and valid," Rodriguez assured me. "You're mourning the family you deserved but never had. That's a profound loss." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Emma's name on the screen felt like a lifeline. Rodriguez nodded permission, and I answered with my good hand. "Amy, are you okay? I saw Sarah at the courthouse this morning for her bail hearing. She looked—" Emma paused, searching for words. Unhinged, like the mask finally came off completely. "She was just here, with Mom and Dad. They tried to convince me to recant." "Of course they did." Emma's voice hardened. "Did you know Aunt Patricia called my mom last night? Tried to get her to make me delete the videos. Said I was destroying the family with my betrayal." "What did your mom say?" "That the only betrayal was letting Sarah hurt you for years while they watched." Emma's voice cracked. "Amy, I'm so sorry I didn't do something sooner. I tried to tell my school counselor once, but without you confirming it—" "You were a kid," I interrupted. "You did more than anyone else. You gathered evidence when no one else bothered to look. Emma, you saved my life." We talked for a few more minutes, Emma describing the bail hearing denied due to the violence of the assault and Sarah's attempt to intimidate me. The family fallout, my aunts and uncles choosing sides, mostly team, Sarah out of long habit, and the reporters starting to dig into Sarah's past 3 former clients had already come forward with complaints about excessive force during training. After we hung up, Rodriguez shared more updates. Sarah's gym had discovered a pattern of complaints they'd dismissed. Clients with mysterious bruises, a junior trainer who'd quit after Sarah demonstrated a submission hold that went too far, equipment damaged by Sarah's enthusiasm. The criminal case was solid, but civil suits were likely brewing. "Your family's reaction today will only help our case," Rodriguez explained. "Their complete lack of remorse, Sarah's admission that she was teaching you a lesson, your parents' focus on their reputation over your well-being, it all paints a clear picture for the jury. Jury, trial." The words felt surreal, like something from a television drama rather than my life. But the metal pins in my arm were real. The years of pain were real. And for the first time, the consequences would be real, too. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you focus on healing. Physical therapy for your arm, counseling for the rest. The legal system will handle Sarah and potentially your parents. You just need to get better and decide what your life looks like without them." A life without my family. This morning that would have seemed like death. But as I lay in that hospital bed, arm slowly healing, truth finally spoken, I realized something. I'd been living without a real family all along. The only difference now was that everyone could see it. And maybe, just maybe, that visibility would finally set me free. 3 days into my hospital stay, physical therapy had become my new torture chamber. Marcus, my therapist, guided my fingers through exercises that would have been simple for a toddler, but felt like climbing Everest with my damaged nerves. Each tiny movement sent sparks of pain through tissue, still learning to reconnect. "You're doing great," Marcus encouraged as I managed to slightly curl my index finger. The surgery was successful, but nerve regeneration takes time. Every movement, no matter how small, is progress. I was attempting to pick up a foam cube when Emma arrived, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and a determined expression that reminded me of a younger, kinder version of Sarah. She'd driven 3 hours from her college town skipping classes that she'd normally never miss. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble, pulling up a chair. "I know this is hard, but the prosecutor wants you to see what I have before it's submitted as evidence." Rodriguez had warned me this was coming. Emma's videos would be crucial for the prosecution, but I needed to be prepared for what they showed. Seeing my abuse from an outside perspective would be different from living it. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emma asked, her young face creased with concern. "We can wait." "No," I said firmly. "I've waited 28 years. Show me." She opened her laptop, navigating to a folder labeled Evidence, Amy. Inside were dozens of video files meticulously organized by date. The earliest was from 2 years ago, titled Thanksgiving 2024. "I started recording after that Thanksgiving when Sarah made you demonstrate her MMA moves," Emma explained quietly. "I couldn't stand watching anymore without doing something." The video opened on our family's dining room, the table cleared after dinner. I watched my past self reluctantly stand as Sarah commanded me to help show everyone her new training. On screen, Sarah grabbed my arm, twisting it into a submission hold while explaining the technique to our assembled relatives. My face on the video showed clear distress, but I remained silent as she applied more pressure. "See how she's not resisting?" "Present," Sarah's recorded voice said cheerfully. "That's because she knows it'll hurt worse if she fights. Perfect training partner." The assembled family laughed. Dad made a joke about me finally being useful for something. Mom commented that maybe some of Sarah's strength would rub off on me. No one noticed or cared that I was biting my lip to keep from crying out. "I recorded 17 incidents over 2 years, Emma said softly, each one worse than the last. But Amy, this last one. She navigated to the most recent file dated yesterday. This is the one that will ensure she never hurts you again. The video started with Sarah's arrival, her loud presence filling the frame as Emma positioned her phone against a vase. The angle captured the entire dining room perfectly. Sarah showing off her medals, my attempts to deflect the forced arm wrestling challenge. Watching it felt like an out-of-body experience. There I was trying so hard to avoid confrontation, making excuses about checking dinner. There was Sarah grabbing my wrist with predatory intensity, forcing me into the chair. The family dynamics were stark on video. Mom and Dad already checked out, treating Sarah's aggression as entertainment. "Watch their faces," Emma instructed, pointing at our parents on screen. "This is important." As video Sarah began twisting my arm, Mom leaned forward with interest, not concern. Dad glanced over his newspaper with mild amusement. They were watching, fully aware as Sarah applied devastating force to my joint. Then came the crack. The sound was nauseating even through laptop speakers. On video, my scream was primal, desperate. But what happened next was worse. Sarah maintained the hold for another 11 seconds. Emma had counted, while I begged her to stop. And in the background, clearly audible, Mom laughed. "Drama queen," recorded Mom said dismissively. "Always such a production with Amy." Dad's newspaper rustled as he returned to reading. "Girls will be girls. Sarah, try not to break anything we have to pay to fix." More laughter. Sarah finally released my arm and I crumpled, cradling the destroyed limb. The video showed what I'd been too pain-blind to see. The immediate swelling, the unnatural angle, the way my fingers had already stopped responding to neural commands. "Walk it off, stop being a baby," video Sarah commanded. "So sensitive. Can't even handle a friendly match without turning it into a crisis. Useless girl." Mom's voice drifted from off-screen as she returned to the kitchen. 28 years old and still can't handle basic interaction without tears. Emma paused the video. "There's more. You stumbling to the bathroom, Sarah following to mock you. But this is the part prosecutors say is most damning. The clear evidence of injury and the family's complete indifference." I stared at the frozen frame, seeing myself as others would see me, a grown woman reduced to a sobbing mess while her family laughed at her pain. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This was my normal, but seeing it objectively revealed the horror I'd been trained to minimize. "There's something else," Emma said carefully. "I did some research into family history. Remember Grandma Patricia? Mom's mother had died when I was 10. My memories were vague. A stern woman who believed children should be seen and not heard, who had very specific ideas about discipline and disappointment." Emma pulled up scanned documents. "I found these in Mom's attic. Medical records, old photos, diary entries. Grandma Patricia was abusive, too. Mom has old fractures consistent with childhood abuse. She learned this was normal and passed it on." The papers painted a familiar picture across generations. Patricia raised by parents who believed in breaking wild spirits. Mom learning that love meant control and violence meant caring enough to correct weakness. Sarah absorbing these lessons and perfecting them with modern strength training. "It goes back at least 4 generations," Emma continued, each one believing they were improving on their parents' methods, each one blind to the damage they caused. "But it stops with us," I said quietly. "You documented instead of perpetuating. I'm speaking up instead of staying silent." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I used to be so angry that you wouldn't report her. I didn't understand how deep the conditioning went. But Amy, watching these videos, seeing how they systematically destroyed your sense of reality, I don't know how you survived." "I almost didn't." I gestured at my pinned arm. If Mrs. Chen hadn't intervened, if the paramedic hadn't recognized abuse, if you hadn't been recording, Sarah might have eventually killed me by accident, and they would have called it clumsiness. My phone rang. Janet Williams, the prosecutor, was on the line. Emma's evidence had been reviewed by her team, and she had updates. "The videos are a prosecutor's dream," Janet said without preamble. "Clear documentation of assault, parental neglect, and a pattern of escalating violence. But Amy, I need to prepare you for something. Sarah's defense attorney is Gregory Hoffman." The name meant nothing to me, but Emma gasped. "The one who got that CEO off for domestic violence?" "He's very good at what he does," Janet confirmed. "He'll try to paint this as sibling rivalry taken too far. Mutual combat even suggests you provoked or consented to the violence. The videos help tremendously, but he'll attack your credibility, your mental state, your motivations for coming forward now." "Let him try," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I have medical evidence spanning decades. I have witnesses. I have Emma's videos, and I have the truth." "That's the attitude we need. Emma, your testimony will be crucial. The defense will try to suggest you manipulated the videos or recorded selectively. Are you prepared for that?" "I have everything backed up in multiple locations, with date stamps verified by cloud services," Emma said firmly. "They can verify authenticity all they want. I recorded what happened, period." After Janet hung up, Emma showed me more videos. Birthday parties where Sarah's playful punches left bruises. Christmas morning when she demonstrated a chokehold that lasted too long. Family barbecues where she'd grab my wrist and squeeze until I dropped whatever I was holding, then mock me for being clumsy. Each video revealed patterns I'd internalized as normal. Sarah never attacked anyone else. She calibrated her violence precisely, enough to hurt and humiliate, not quite enough to require immediate hospitalization. Our parents' reactions were consistent: amusement, dismissal, or active encouragement of Sarah's dominance. This one breaks my heart. Emma said, pulling up a video from last summer. On screen, I was helping Mom in the kitchen when Sarah entered and hip-checked me into the counter hard. I stumbled, catching myself but jarring my ribs. Without missing a beat, I apologized to Sarah for being in her way. You apologized to her for assaulting you, Emma said wonderingly. That's when I knew how completely they'd broken you down. You genuinely believed existing in space was an offense that justified violence. The outside perspective was shattering. Every video showed a woman so conditioned to abuse that she apologized for being hurt, minimized obvious injuries, and tried to make herself smaller to avoid attracting violence. I looked like a classic abuse victim, which shouldn't have been surprising but somehow was. Can I ask you something? Emma said carefully. When did it start, the violence? I thought back, trying to pinpoint a beginning. My earliest memory is being 4. Sarah would have been 6. She pushed me down the stairs because I was taking too long. Mom said I needed to learn to be faster. 4 years old. Emma's voice was hollow. She's been hurting you for 24 years. The math was stark. 2.5 decades of violence masquerading as sibling interaction. Thousands of incidents, large and small, each one reinforcing that I deserved pain for existing incorrectly. Why didn't you ever fight back? Emma asked. You're not weak. I've seen you lift heavy boxes, work long hours. You have physical strength. Fighting back made it worse, I explained. I tried once when I was 12, pushed her away when she was choking me. She responded by breaking my finger and telling Mom I'd attacked her unprovoked. I was grounded for a month and had to write an apology letter for my violent behavior. Emma stared at the laptop screen where another video waited. I'm going to testify. I'm going to show every single recording and make sure everyone understands what they did to you. Sarah won't wriggle out of this. What about family? I asked. Mom's already called you a traitor. This will split everyone. Good, Emma said fiercely. Anyone who sides with an abuser after seeing this evidence isn't family worth keeping. You know who is family: Mrs. Chen, who got you help, the paramedic who recognized abuse, the prosecutor fighting for justice, the physical therapist helping you heal. That's your real family now. As she packed up her laptop, preparing to meet with the prosecutor, I flexed my slowly improving fingers. Each tiny movement was progress, Marcus had said. The same was true for breaking free from abuse. Every truth told every boundary, set every person who believed me, all tiny movements toward healing. Emma, I called as she reached the door. Thank you for seeing what everyone else ignored, for caring enough to document it, for believing it was wrong even when everyone said it was normal. She smiled through tears. You would have done the same for me. And I would have. Despite everything, despite 24 years of being taught I was worthless, I would have protected her. That instinct to shield others from harm, even when I couldn't shield myself, meant Sarah hadn't destroyed everything good in me. The videos would damn my family in court, but more importantly, they'd validated a lifetime of pain I'd been gaslit into doubting. Each recording whispered the same truth. This happened. It was real. It was wrong. And it was never your fault. For the first time in 28 years, I truly believed it. The surgical follow-up appointment came 2 weeks after the initial operation. Dr. Martinez carefully examined my arm, now free from the external fixation, but still wrapped in protective bandaging. The swelling had decreased dramatically, revealing the full extent of the surgical intervention. Neat incision lines where he'd had to open the arm to decompress the nerves and stabilize the fractures with internal hardware. Flex your fingers for me, he instructed, watching intently as I managed to curl them halfway closed. Good, now try to make a fist. The movement was weak, trembling with effort, but all 5 fingers responded. 2 weeks ago, they'd been lifeless meat hanging from my wrist. Now they obeyed neural commands, even if imperfectly. Excellent progress. Dr. Martinez made notes in his tablet. The nerve conduction study shows significant improvement. With continued therapy, I'm optimistic about full recovery. Will I be able to use my hand normally again? Right type hold things. With time and dedication to your therapy, yes, you're already exceeding expected progress markers. He set down the tablet, his expression growing serious. Amy, I've been asked to testify at your sister's trial. My medical findings will be part of the prosecution's case. The trial date had been set for 6 weeks out. Light speed for the justice system, according to Janet Williams. Sarah remained in custody after being denied bail for a second time, following what the judge called credible threats against the victim. Her attorney was pushing for a plea deal, but Sarah refused to admit wrongdoing. "What will you testify about?" I asked. "The extent of your injuries, both current and historical. The mechanism of trauma required to cause such damage. The fact that continuing to apply force after the initial break shows intent to cause maximum harm." He pulled up my imaging on his computer. "I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. This type of spiral fracture with associated nerve damage typically comes from torture scenarios, not sibling disagreements." The word torture sat heavy in the sterile medical office. Too dramatic, my conditioning whispered. Just rough play taken too far. But Dr. Martinez's clinical assessment cut through years of minimization. "I've also documented the pattern of old injuries." He continued, highlighting areas on the x-rays. "Multiple fractures in various stages of healing, some showing signs of improper treatment. Stress fractures consistent with repeated trauma to the same areas. Bone density changes suggesting chronic injury. My medical history is that extensive. Your bones tell a story of systematic abuse spanning decades." His voice remained professionally neutral, but his eyes showed compassion. Each injury left its mark. Collectively, they paint a picture that's impossible to ignore. Physical therapy followed the appointment. Marcus had designed a program specifically for nerve regeneration and strength rebuilding. The exercises looked simple: picking up marbles, squeezing therapy putty, tracing letters in sand. In practice, each movement required total concentration and left me exhausted. "Neural pathways are like roads," Marcus explained as I struggled to grip a pencil. "The injury created roadblocks. We're building detours until the main routes can be repaired." Halfway through the session, Mark Chen arrived. Mrs. Chen's nephew was a physical therapist specializing in trauma recovery, and she'd arranged for him to consult on my case. His assessment was thorough and revealed something disturbing. "Show me your range of motion in your left shoulder," he requested after examining my right arm. I demonstrated confused why he was checking my uninjured side. His frown deepened as he watched. Now the right shoulder. The movement felt different, looser somehow. Mark made notes, then performed several manual tests checking joint stability and muscle response. "You mentioned learning to dislocate your shoulder to minimize damage during attacks," he said carefully. "How often did that happen?" "I don't know. Dozens of times it started when I was 16 and figured out it hurt less to let the joint slip than to resist Sarah's arm locks." Mark's expression grew grave. "Amy, you have chronic shoulder instability from repeated dislocations. The joint capsule is permanently stretched. You've essentially trained your shoulder to subluxate as a defense mechanism. Is that serious? It means you're at high risk for future dislocations, even from minor trauma. We'll need to add shoulder stabilization work to your therapy program." He demonstrated specific exercises. "This is medical evidence of long-term abuse adaptation. Your body modified itself to survive repeated attacks." The phrase abuse adaptation echoed in my mind during the ride home. My body had literally reformed itself around Sarah's violence. Fingers that knew to go limp to avoid breaks, a shoulder that dislocated on command, a nervous system that shut down rather than fight back. I was a walking testament to survival mechanisms no one should need. Mrs. Chen had insisted I stay with her during recovery, transforming her guest room into a haven of soft colors and healing quiet. She was in the kitchen when I returned, preparing soup with the focused attention she brought to everything. "How was therapy?" she asked, ladling homemade chicken noodle into bowls. "Exhausting. Mark found damage I didn't even know existed." I explained about the shoulder instability, watching her face darken with each word. "Your body keeps the score," she said quietly. "In my nursing days, I saw many abuse survivors. The physical injuries heal, but the adaptations remain. You learn to make yourself breakable to avoid being broken. That takes incredible psychological toll." We ate in companionable silence until my phone rang. Janet Williams had updates about the case. "Sarah's attorney filed a motion to exclude the video evidence," she said without preamble. "Claims it was recorded without consent and violates wiretapping laws." My stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "He can try, but it won't succeed. The recordings were made in common areas of the home where there's no expectation of privacy. Emma lived there during holidays and had every right to document activities in shared spaces." Janet's voice carried confidence. "This is a desperation move. He knows those videos are damning." "What else is he trying?" "Character assassination, mostly. He subpoenaed your work records looking for evidence of instability or attention-seeking behavior. He's interviewing Sarah's gym clients to paint her as a dedicated professional who couldn't possibly be violent." A pause. "Amy, he's also hired a medical expert to dispute Dr. Martinez's findings. Dispute them how the injuries are clearly documented. He'll likely argue the breaks could have been accidental, that the old injuries aren't definitively linked to Sarah, that you're exaggerating the severity. It's standard defense strategy. Muddy the waters, create reasonable doubt. But the videos show... The videos are powerful, which is why he's trying so hard to exclude them. Without them, it becomes he said, she said, with medical evidence open to interpretation. Janet's tone softened. "But Amy, we have something his client doesn't. Consistency. Your story hasn't changed. The medical evidence supports every claim. Multiple witnesses are coming forward. Sarah, on the other hand, has given 3 different versions of events and counting." After the call, I found myself in Mrs. Chen's garden, seeking solace among her carefully tended plants. The late autumn roses still bloomed defiant against the coming winter. I thought about resilience, about things that survive despite harsh conditions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You lying bitch. Sarah's career is ruined because you can't take a joke. Watch your back." I showed it to Mrs. Chen, who immediately called Detective Rodriguez. This was the 4th threatening message this week, all from different numbers, but with similar themes. I was a liar, an attention seeker, a family destroyer. "Sarah has loyal followers from the gym," Rodriguez explained when she arrived to document the threats. "We're tracking the numbers, but they're using burner phones and VPNs. We've increased patrols in the neighborhood as a precaution." The idea that Sarah had people willing to threaten me on her behalf was chilling, but it also revealed something important. She'd shown them only one face, the dedicated trainer and motivational athlete. They couldn't reconcile that image with the woman who broke bones for entertainment. Dr. Martinez called that evening with additional information. "I've been contacted by 3 other medical professionals who treated you over the years. They want to provide supporting documentation about injuries they suspected were abuse-related, but couldn't prove without your cooperation. 3 others. Dr. Patricia Hendricks from Urgent Care. She treated your ribs in 2014. Dr. James Liu saw you for a concussion in 2018. Nurse practitioner Sandra Williams handled multiple bruising incidents between 2019 and 2021. He paused. "Amy, they all documented concerns about abuse in their private notes. They're willing to testify." The network of professionals who'd noticed but couldn't act without my participation was staggering. All those times I'd lied about falling or being clumsy, they'd seen through it but been bound by my denials. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez continued. "I've been reviewing your bone density scans more carefully. You show signs of chronic stress-related calcium depletion. Essentially, living in constant fear affected your bone development. It's subtle but measurable. Another piece of physical evidence showing long-term trauma. My bones had literally been weakened by fear. The metaphor was too perfect, too painful. Sarah hadn't just broken my bones, she'd ensured they were easier to break through years of psychological terrorism. That night, I dreamed about testifying. In the dream, I stood in a courtroom trying to speak, but my words turned to dust. Sarah laughed from the defendant's table while our parents sat in the gallery, shaking their heads in disappointment. I woke, gasping, my healing arm throbbing with phantom pain. Mrs. Chen found me on the porch at 3 a.m., wrapped in a blanket and watching the stars. "Can't sleep." She settled beside me with 2 cups of tea. "I keep thinking about testifying. What if I freeze? What if the jury doesn't believe me? What if Sarah's attorney makes me look like a vindictive liar?" "What if you tell the truth and set yourself free?" Mrs. Chen countered gently. "Fear of what might happen is another cage your family built around you, but cages only work if you stay inside them." She was right. For 28 years, I'd lived in the cage of family loyalty, accepting abuse as the price of belonging. Now the door stood open, but stepping through required facing every fear they'd programmed into me. "The body remembers trauma," Mrs. Chen continued, "but it also remembers healing. Every day your arm gets stronger. Every therapy session builds new pathways. Your body is learning it can exist without being broken." I flexed my fingers, watching them respond with increasing coordination. 6 weeks ago, these fingers were purple and lifeless. Now they held a teacup, traced patterns in condensation on the glass, wrote shaky but legible words. Progress measured in millimeters, but progress nonetheless. "Dr. Martinez says my bones tell a story," I said quietly. "Then let them tell it," Mrs. Chen replied. "In that courtroom, let every fracture speak. Let every scar bear witness. Let the truth written in your bones drown out the lies your family told." The trial would be brutal. Sarah's attorney would attack my credibility. My family would paint me as delusional, and strangers would judge whether my pain qualified as criminal. But my bones didn't lie. The X-rays didn't care about family loyalty. The nerve damage couldn't be gaslit away. For the first time in my life, my body was on my side, telling truths I'd been forbidden to speak. Each healing fracture was a testimony. Each regenerating nerve was evidence. Each day of recovery was proof that I deserved better than what my family had given me. The stars above were cold and distant, but they were also constant, like truth, like bones that remembered every blow but still held me upright, like hands that were learning to be whole again, one exercise at a time. The prosecutor's office buzzed with controlled chaos when I arrived for trial preparation. Janet Williams commanded a conference room filled with evidence boxes, legal documents, and a massive timeline stretching across one wall. Red pins marked each documented injury, creating a constellation of harm spanning 2 decades. "Amy, perfect timing." Janet gestured to a chair across from a stern-faced woman in her 50s. "This is Dr. Elaine Foster, our medical expert witness. She's reviewed all your records." Dr. Foster's handshake was firm, her gaze clinical as she assessed me. "I've examined cases of systematic abuse for 30 years. She began without preamble. "Your injury pattern is textbook for prolonged sibling abuse with parental enabling. The progression from minor injuries in childhood to major trauma in adulthood follows established escalation patterns." She spread medical imaging across the table, my bones laid bare in black and white. "See this scarring on the radius? That's from the poorly healed break at 16. This compression in the L3 vertebra, consistent with being slammed into hard surfaces repeatedly. These stress fractures in your ribs show a pattern of repeated blunt force trauma to the same area." Each injury had its own story, but together they painted a picture of sustained torture. Dr. Foster's clinical detachment somehow made it more real. This wasn't family drama, but documented medical evidence of criminal assault. "The defense will argue these could be from accidents or sports injuries," Janet warned. "How do we counter that?" "Location and pattern." Dr. Foster replied immediately. "Accidental injuries are typically random. different body parts varying severity. These injuries concentrate on areas commonly targeted in abuse, arms, ribs, joints that can be manipulated. The spiral fracture, in particular, requires sustained rotational force. You don't get that from falling downstairs. A knock interrupted us. Janet's paralegal entered with a grim expression. Defense just filed their witness list. They're calling character witnesses from Sarah's gym, a biomechanics expert, to dispute the injury mechanism and... She hesitated. Both parents as witnesses for the defense. My stomach lurched. Mom and Dad would testify for Sarah against me. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the betrayal still cut deep. Let them, Janet said coolly. Their testimony will only reinforce the enabling environment that allowed this abuse to continue. Speaking of witnesses, Amy, we need to discuss your testimony. The next 3 hours were grueling. Janet walked me through every question she'd ask, then transformed into Sarah's attorney, attacking my credibility with surgical precision. By the end, I was shaking, but I'd learned to maintain my truth despite aggressive questioning. Remember, Janet coached short, clear answers. Don't volunteer extra information. If you need a break, ask for one. The defense will try to make you emotional. That's okay. Showing genuine emotion isn't weakness. On the drive home, I passed the courthouse where everything would unfold in 2 weeks. Media vans were already staking out positions. Sarah's case had attracted attention. The CrossFit instructor who tortured her sister, the family that laughed while bones broke. My private pain was becoming public spectacle. Mrs. Chen was gardening when I returned her movements meditative as she prepared beds for winter. How did it go? My parents are testifying for Sarah. The words came out flat, drained of emotion I couldn't afford to feel yet. She set down her tools, studying me with those wise eyes. Of course they are. To support you would mean admitting 28 years of failure. Easier to double down on the lie than face the truth. That evening, Emma called with her own trial preparation updates. Sarah's attorney tried to intimidate me during the deposition, kept asking if I'd edited the videos, if I had a vendetta against Sarah, if you'd coached me to lie. What did you say? The truth. That I documented what I saw because no one else would. That watching my cousin be systematically tortured while adults laughed made me physically ill. That I have every original file with metadata proving authenticity. Her voice hardened. He didn't like that I came prepared. Emma, this is going to get ugly. Are you sure? Stop. Her interruption was gentle but firm. You protected me when we were kids, as much as you could, while being abused yourself. You took hits meant for me when Sarah was angry. Now it's my turn to protect you. I'm testifying, and nothing that lawyer says will change that. The next morning brought another medical appointment. A neurologist examined my arm, testing nerve conduction and muscle response. The results were encouraging but sobering. You're lucky, Dr. Park explained. Another hour without treatment and the nerve damage would likely have been permanent. As it is, you're looking at 6 months to a year of therapy for full recovery. Will I have lasting effects? Possibly some cold sensitivity, minor weakness in grip strength. But considering the severity of the initial injury, this is an excellent prognosis. She paused. I'll be providing a report for the trial, the level of force required to cause this damage. Your sister has significant strength training. She knew exactly how much pressure would cause maximum damage without immediate death. Without immediate death. The casual phrase hit hard. Sarah had calibrated her violence precisely walking the line between torture and murder. As I left the appointment, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Is this Amy Mitchell? The voice was female, nervous. My name is Diane Morrison. I was Sarah's client at CrossFit Apex. I heard about the trial and I need to tell someone what she did to me. We met at a quiet coffee shop. Diane was mid-40s, athletic, but with a haunted look I recognized from my own mirror. Sarah was my trainer for 6 months. She began, hands wrapped around her coffee cup. At first, she was motivating, pushing me to exceed my limits, but then it became something else. She'd add weight when I wasn't looking, extend sets, Past failure physically forced me into positions that caused injury. Did you report it? I tried. The gym management said Sarah was their best trainer, that I was being too sensitive. They offered me free sessions with someone else to smooth things over. Diane's laugh was bitter. 2 months later, she injured another client badly enough to require surgery. They quietly let her go, but gave glowing references. Would you testify? Diane nodded slowly. I've been in therapy dealing with what she did. My therapist says confronting it in court might help, and if it stops her from hurting anyone else. Janet was thrilled when I reported the conversation. Another witness to Sarah's pattern of calculated violence, proof it extended beyond family. The defense's image of Sarah as a dedicated professional was cracking. But Sarah wasn't going quietly. That night, graffiti appeared on Mrs. Chen's fence, "Liar," spray-painted in red. Security footage showed a hooded figure billed consistent with one of Sarah's gym friends. Detective Rodriguez added it to the growing pile of witness intimidation evidence. They're getting desperate, Rodriguez observed. Sarah's lost her job, her reputation, her freedom. Her supporters are lashing out because the image they believed in is crumbling. The final pretrial meeting brought all the witnesses together. Emma with her laptops full of evidence, Dr. Martinez and his medical testimony, Diane Morrison and 2 other former clients who'd found courage to come forward, Mrs. Chen, who'd witnessed the aftermath, Jennifer the paramedic whose quick action had saved my arm. This is bigger than just Sarah now, Janet explained. We're exposing a system that enabled abuse, the gym that ignored complaints, the parents who encouraged violence, the community that stayed silent. Your case could set precedents for how sibling abuse is prosecuted. No pressure, I thought wryly. Just reshape the entire legal approach to family violence while confronting your abuser in public. That night I sat with my slowly healing arm tracing the surgical scars that marked where Dr. Martinez had saved both limb and life. Tomorrow would begin jury selection. Next week I'd face Sarah across a courtroom and speak truths that had been silenced for decades. My phone buzzed with a message from Julia, my book club friend. Whatever happens, we're proud of you. Breaking silence takes more strength than any CrossFit workout. She was right. Sarah had trained her body for physical dominance, but I'd trained something else, the courage to speak truth despite a lifetime of conditioning to stay silent. My bones might bear witness to the violence, but my voice would carry the story. The legal battle was beginning. Win or lose, I'd already achieved something Sarah never expected. I'd survived long enough to tell the truth, and sometimes that's the greatest victory of all. The story broke on local news first. CrossFit instructor charged with decades of sibling abuse ran beneath footage of Sarah being led into court for a hearing. Within hours, it had been picked up by national outlets, each adding their own spin to the narrative of the fitness gurus who'd terrorized her sister since childhood. I watched the coverage from Mrs. Chen's living room feeling surreal as reporters discussed my life with clinical detachment. They'd obtained Sarah's professional headshots, contrasting them with her mugshot. The transformation was stark, from glowing athlete to hollow-eyed defendant. Turn it off if it's too much, Mrs. Chen advised, but I needed to see how the world was responding. The first wave came through social media. Sarah's Instagram, once filled with motivational posts and workout videos, became a battleground. Former clients shared their own stories of excessive force disguised as training. Other fitness professionals distanced themselves, claiming they'd always sensed something off about her intensity. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the story went viral. Messages flooded in from unexpected sources. High school classmates, college acquaintances, co-workers from previous jobs. Each carried the same theme. We saw something, but didn't know how to help. The most surprising message came from Ms. Rodriguez, my 10th grade English teacher. Amy, I've carried guilt for 15 years about not doing more. Your essay about family dynamics haunted me. I knew you were crying for help but couldn't prove it. I'm prepared to testify about what I observed if it helps your case. By evening, Janet had a list of 23 additional witnesses who'd come forward. Teachers, neighbors, family friends, medical professionals, all offering testimony about injuries, observed concerns, dismissed patterns, noticed, but never addressed. "This is unprecedented," Janet said during our phone call. "Usually we struggle to find witnesses in family abuse cases. Your story has given people permission to speak up." The community support manifested in unexpected ways. A GoFundMe for my medical expenses surpassed its goal within 12 hours. Physical therapists offered free sessions. A local counselor specializing in family trauma volunteered her services. The bookstore where my club met created a display about recognizing and preventing domestic abuse. But the most meaningful support came from other survivors. They shared their stories privately, acknowledging the unique pain of sibling abuse, the gaslighting, the minimization, the way society dismissed it as kids being kids, no matter the age. CrossFit Apex issued a statement that made things worse for Sarah. While attempting to distance themselves from her actions, they inadvertently revealed a pattern of complaints they'd ignored. 3 former employees came forward describing how management had discouraged them from documenting injuries in Sarah's classes. The gym faced its own investigation now. Local news interviewed former clients outside the gym. Most expressed shock, but a significant minority admitted to experiencing or witnessing concerning behavior. She called it pushing past mental barriers, but looking back, it was just cruelty. One woman told reporters. The ripple effects reached my family's social circles. Mom's book club publicly disinvited her. Dad's golf club instituted a temporary suspension pending the trial outcome. The country club they'd valued above my safety no longer wanted their membership. A particularly scathing editorial in the local paper examined the culture of silence around sibling abuse. The journalist had done her homework interviewing experts who explained how sibling violence was often the most dismissed form of family abuse. She cited my case as an example of how maintaining family reputation enabled decades of torture. Emma called that night, her voice mixing exhaustion and exhilaration. "My university newspaper wants to interview me about documenting abuse. They're calling me a hero for recording evidence. How do you feel about that?" "Weird. I'm not a hero. I just couldn't watch anymore." She paused. "Amy, there's something else. Aunt Patricia called my mom. She wants to testify for the prosecution." I nearly dropped the phone. Aunt Patricia was Mom's younger sister, someone who'd maintained careful distance from our family drama for years. "Really?" She says she's been in therapy dealing with their childhood. Apparently, Grandma Patricia did to them what Sarah did to you, but worse. She has journals, photos, her own medical records. She wants to testify about the generational pattern. The family skeleton wasn't just out of the closet. It was dancing in the public square. Each revelation connected another dot in the pattern of inherited violence our family had disguised as strength training. Mrs. Chen's doorbell rang constantly as supporters dropped off meals, flowers, cards of encouragement. The elderly Vietnamese woman 3 houses down brought po and shared her own story of escaping an abusive marriage. The young couple across the street offered to install security cameras after the graffiti incident. Community meant something different when it wasn't bound by blood. "You've started something," Mrs. Chen observed as we sorted through another delivery of supportive messages. "Your courage has given others permission to examine their own experiences." But the backlash was equally intense. Sarah's supporters created a Justice for Sarah Mitchell Facebook group sharing gym photos and testimonials about her dedication and passion. They painted me as jealous of her success, mentally unstable, a liar seeking attention. Someone leaked my work address, resulting in protesters outside my office building until security intervened. "Don't read the comments," Julia advised during book club, which had become more support group than literary discussion. "The people defending her are seeing their own actions reflected. If they admit Sarah is guilty, they might have to examine their own behavior." She was right. The most virulent defenders often revealed themselves in their arguments. Coaches who bragged about breaking weak athletes, parents who insisted tough love, built character siblings who minimized their own violent behavior as normal rivalry. A breakthrough came when a sports medicine physician published an analysis of my injuries in a medical journal. Dr. Catherine Sharp examined the publicly available evidence and concluded that the force required to create my specific fracture pattern exceeded anything that could occur accidentally or through normal sibling conflict. Her professional reputation added weight that even Sarah's defenders struggled to dismiss. The local domestic violence shelter reached out asking if I'd speak at their survivor support group after the trial. "Your visibility is helping others recognize abuse patterns," the director explained, "especially those who've been told sibling violence doesn't count." As trial approached, the support network solidified. Janet arranged for victim advocates to accompany me to court. A trauma counselor prepared me for the emotional toll of testimony. The courthouse increased security after threats were made against witnesses. Sarah tried to control the narrative from jail, having her attorney release a statement about her dedication to helping others achieve their physical potential and how this misunderstanding had destroyed her life's work. It backfired spectacularly when 3 more gym clients came forward with documented injuries from her classes. "She's making our case for us," Janet observed. "Every time she opens her mouth, she reveals the mindset that enabled this abuse. She genuinely doesn't understand that hurting people isn't motivational." The night before jury selection, I attended a gathering organized by the Domestic Violence Coalition. 50 survivors and supporters filled a community center room, sharing stories and strategies. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one whose family had chosen violence over love. The hardest part, one woman shared, was accepting that they knew exactly what they were doing. "My brother didn't accidentally break my arm 3 times. Your sister didn't accidentally torture you for decades. They chose violence because they could." Another survivor, a man whose older brother had terrorized him throughout childhood, added, "People always ask why we didn't fight back. They don't understand. We were trained from birth to accept it. Fighting back meant worse violence. Telling meant being called liars. Existing meant being targets." Their words echoed my experience so precisely it took my breath away. Around the room, heads nodded in recognition. We were a club nobody wanted to join, bound by the shared experience of being betrayed by those who should have protected us. As the gathering ended, the coalition president pressed a small pin into my hand. "For court," she explained, "so you remember you're not alone in there." The pin was simple, a purple ribbon intertwined with a silver heart. Domestic violence awareness merged with family trauma survival. I fastened it inside my jacket where I could touch it during testimony. The drive home passed in contemplative silence. Mrs. Chen understood the weight of tomorrow without needing words. In 12 hours, jury selection would begin. The private would become public record. Sarah would sit across from me, forced to hear truths she'd spent decades denying. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Chen finally asked as we pulled into her driveway. "No," I answered honestly. "But I'm going anyway. All these people who've supported me, who've shared their own stories, I owe them my truth." "You owe yourself your truth," she corrected gently. "The rest is just ripples from that stone dropping into still water." That night, messages continued pouring in. Strangers who'd found courage in my story. Survivors who'd kept silent for decades. Parents who'd realized they'd enabled sibling abuse. Teachers who'd learned to recognize signs they'd previously missed. Sarah had broken my bones, but she'd failed to break my spirit. And in speaking my truth, I'd discovered something powerful. I wasn't alone. An entire community of survivors stood ready to catch me if I fell to amplify my voice, if it faltered to witness truth that family had tried to bury. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom carrying not just my own story, but the validated experiences of countless others who'd been told their pain didn't matter. Sarah would face justice, but more importantly, the silence that had protected abusers like her would finally shatter. The community had spoken. Now it was time for the courts to listen. The courthouse steps stretched before me like a mountain to climb. Media clustered around the entrance, their cameras and microphones, creating a gauntlet I'd have to pass through. Janet walked on my left, a victim advocate on my right, creating a protective barrier as we pushed forward. Amy, do you have a statement? How does it feel to face your sister? Are you seeking damages? The questions blurred together into white noise as we climbed steadily upward. Inside the corridors hummed with nervous energy. Other cases were being heard: divorces, custody battles, petty crimes, but ours had drawn the crowd. The bailiff had to turn people away when the gallery filled to capacity. Then I saw them. Mom and Dad sat in the front row behind the defense table, dressed in their Sunday best. Mom wore the pearl necklace Dad had given her for their 25th anniversary. They looked like respectable suburban parents, not enablers of decades of abuse. Neither looked at me. Sarah entered from a side door in shackles, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to her usual athletic wear. Jail had taken its toll. Her muscle mass had decreased, her skin was pale, and her signature ponytail hung limp. But her eyes still blazed with the same anger I'd seen throughout childhood. Our gazes met across the courtroom. For a moment, we were children again. Her looming over me with raised fists, me cowering and hoping it would end quickly. Then I touched the pin hidden in my jacket, remembering the community standing behind me, and straightened my spine. "All rise for Judge Caroline Matthews," the bailiff announced. Judge Matthews commanded the room with quiet authority. Her reputation for fairness was balanced by intolerance for courtroom theatrics. She'd overseen dozens of domestic violence cases and wasn't easily swayed by emotional manipulation. Jury selection took most of the morning. Janet systematically excluded anyone who expressed beliefs that sibling violence was normal or that family matters should stay private. Sarah's attorney, Gregory Hoffman, tried to pack the jury with older men who might sympathize with discipline and tough love. The final 12 were a diverse group who seemed genuinely interested in hearing evidence. Opening statements set the battle lines. Janet painted a picture of systematic torture, enabled by parental neglect, backed by medical evidence and video documentation. She promised the jury would see not rough play, not sibling rivalry, but calculated violence designed to break both body and spirit. Hoffman countered with the narrative we'd expected. Sarah was a dedicated athlete trying to help her weaker sister. Any injuries were accidental, exaggerated, or self-inflicted for attention. Amy was jealous of Sarah's success and had orchestrated this vendetta to destroy her sister's life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hoffman intoned, "you'll hear about old injuries with no proof of causation. You'll see selectively edited videos lacking context. You'll listen to a woman who waited 28 years to suddenly claim abuse, coincidentally right when her sister's career was taking off." I wanted to scream at the lies, but Janet had coached me well. I kept my expression neutral, saving my response for testimony. The prosecution's case began with Dr. Martinez. His credentials established, he walked the jury through my injuries with clinical precision. The courtroom screens displayed X-rays and MRIs as he explained the mechanics of spiral fractures, nerve compression, and systematic trauma. "Could these injuries result from normal sibling conflict?" Janet asked. "Absolutely not," Dr. Martinez stated firmly. "The force required to create this specific fracture pattern is equivalent to torture techniques. The perpetrator would need significant strength and knowledge of joint manipulation to cause this damage." Hoffman's cross-examination tried to muddy the waters. "Doctor, isn't it true that arm wrestling injuries can be severe when participants don't know their own strength?" "The injury pattern is inconsistent with arm wrestling," Dr. Martinez replied. "This shows sustained rotational force applied after the initial break. In layman's terms, someone kept twisting after the bone snapped." Several jurors visibly winced at the description. Emma testified next, her young face serious, as she explained why she'd started recording family gatherings. Janet played video after video, Sarah's casual violence treated as entertainment by our parents. The Thanksgiving demonstration was particularly damning, showing Sarah explaining how to maximize pain while applying holds. "I recorded because no one else was watching," Emma said quietly. "Or they were watching and laughing. I thought if I had proof someday someone would care." Hoffman attacked her motivations, suggesting she'd been coached or had edited the videos. Emma remained calm, walking him through the technical details that proved authenticity. Her preparation was flawless, turning his attacks into further validation. The most powerful video was saved for last: the assault that broke my arm. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as they watched Sarah twist my arm past, breaking maintain the hold while I screamed, and then mock my pain. In the background, our parents' laughter provided a horrifying soundtrack. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Dad stared at his hands, but Sarah watched with detached interest as if viewing someone else's crime. On day 2, I took the stand. My hands trembled as I swore to tell the truth. Janet started gently establishing background before diving into the abuse history. I spoke about growing up in fear, learning to minimize pain to avoid worse punishment, developing coping mechanisms like voluntary shoulder dislocation. "Why didn't you report the abuse earlier?" Janet asked the question we'd rehearsed extensively. "Because I was taught it was normal. Because reporting would make it worse. Because who believes the weak sibling over the strong one? I looked directly at the jury. Because when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones enabling harm, you learn silence is survival." The defense's cross-examination was brutal. Hoffman questioned every injury, suggested I was accident-prone, implied mental instability. He brought up my failed engagement, my work history, anything to paint me as unstable and vindictive. "Isn't it convenient," he sneered, "that you suddenly remember all this abuse right when your sister's career was flourishing?" "I never forgot," I replied steadily. "I just finally found people who believed me. People like your cousin who conveniently started recording right when you needed evidence." Emma started recording because she couldn't stand watching me be hurt anymore. She was 16 and braver than every adult who looked the other way. The questioning continued for hours. Hoffman tried every angle. I was jealous, delusional, attention-seeking, vindictive. Through it all, I held on to the truth and the pin in my pocket, reminding myself of the community that believed me. Sarah testified on day 3, and it was a disaster for the defense. Her story changed multiple times under Janet's questioning. First, the arm wrestling was gentle play. Then it was competitive but controlled. Finally, she admitted to maybe getting carried away, but insisted I was exaggerating. "You heard the crack of breaking bone," Janet pressed. "Bones make noise sometimes," Sarah said dismissively. "Joints pop. Amy always made everything sound worse than it was." "So you continued applying pressure after hearing what might have been a breaking bone." Sarah's mask slipped. She needed to learn not to be weak. I was helping her. Everything I did was to make her stronger. By breaking her bones. By teaching her that the world doesn't coddle losers. Sarah snapped, then caught herself too late. The jury's expressions shifted. They'd just seen the real Sarah. Not the polished athlete, but the abuser who justified torture as life lessons. Mom's testimony backfired spectacularly. She tried to paint Sarah as a devoted sister and me as troubled, but Janet's cross-examination revealed the truth. When shown the video of her laughing while I screamed in pain, Mom broke down. "I thought she was being dramatic," Mom sobbed. "Amy always exaggerated. Sarah said she was fine, just needed to toughen up. I believed Sarah because..." She trailed off. "Because Sarah was the favorite," Janet suggested gently. "Because Sarah was strong," Mom whispered, "like my mother wanted us to be. Amy was soft emotional. Mother would have fixed that, too." The generational trauma stood naked in the courtroom. Mom had chosen to perpetuate abuse rather than protect her vulnerable child. The jury saw it clearly. Dad's testimony was worse. He admitted to prioritizing medical costs over my well-being, to dismissing injuries as girl drama, to encouraging Sarah's dominance as character building. When asked why he'd never intervened, his answer chilled the room. Sarah was going places. Amy wasn't. We invested in the winner. Closing arguments crystallized the case. Janet showed the pattern: escalating violence, parental enabling, and a young woman who'd learned to break her own body to minimize damage from relentless abuse. Amy Mitchell survived 28 years of torture, Janet concluded. She's asking you to finally give her what her family never did: justice. Hoffman made one last attempt to minimize the abuse as sibling rivalry gone too far. But the evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. Even Sarah's supporters in the gallery looked uncomfortable. As the jury filed out to deliberate, I caught Sarah's eye one last time. The anger was still there, but underneath lay something else: disbelief. She genuinely couldn't understand how her actions were criminal. In her mind, she'd been building character through violence just as generations before had done. The wait was excruciating. 1 hour, 2. Janet assured me quick verdicts usually favored prosecution, but uncertainty gnawed at my bones. Then after 3 hours and 47 minutes, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back in the courtroom, packed to capacity. Sarah stood as the jury foreman read. On the charge of aggravated assault causing bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued through all charges. Sarah's face went white with each pronouncement. Mom sobbed loudly. Dad sat frozen. But in the gallery, Emma smiled through tears. Mrs. Chen nodded with satisfaction, and the domestic violence advocates who'd attended pumped fists in quiet victory. Judge Matthews scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks out, but revoked bail based on the severity of conviction and previous threatening behavior. As officers prepared to lead Sarah away, she turned to me one final time. "I made you stronger," she said, voice carrying across the courtroom. "Everything I did made you who you are. You should thank me." "No," I replied clearly. "I made me stronger, in spite of you, not because of you." They led her away in shackles, still unable to comprehend that strength didn't require breaking others. Mom fled the courtroom without a word. Dad followed, pausing only to glare at me with undisguised hatred. They'd chosen their side long ago. Outside the courthouse, media waited for statements. This time I was ready. "For 28 years, I was told my pain didn't matter," I said into the microphones. "Today, 12 strangers said it did. To everyone trapped in family violence being told it's normal, it's not. To everyone suffering in silence because speaking up seems impossible, you're not alone. And to everyone who thinks breaking bodies builds character, you're wrong. Real strength is surviving abuse and finding the courage to say, no more." The questions came rapid fire, but Janet guided me away. We'd said what needed saying. The rest would be written in sentencing, in appeals, in the long journey of healing ahead. As we drove away from the courthouse, I removed the purple pin from my jacket, holding it up to catch the afternoon light. Such a small thing, but it had anchored me through testimony, through cross-examination, through Sarah's final delusion. I wasn't alone. A community of survivors had stood with me in that courtroom, their stories woven into mine. Together, we'd face down the lie that family violence was acceptable, that might made right, that breaking bones built character. Sarah would face consequences. Our parents would live with their choices. And I would continue healing, surrounded by chosen family who understood that real love never required pain as payment. The verdict was guilty. But more importantly, the truth was finally free. The 2 weeks between conviction and sentencing passed in a blur of activity. Media coverage intensified as more of Sarah's victims came forward, painting a picture of systematic abuse that extended far beyond our family. CrossFit Apex faced multiple lawsuits. The State Athletic Commission launched an investigation into how someone with violent tendencies had been certified as a trainer. I spent those weeks in therapy, both physical and psychological. Dr. Lisa Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, specialized in family trauma and helped me process the earthquake of emotions following the trial. "You're experiencing grief," she explained during one session, "not for the family you had, but for the family you should have had. The parents who should have protected you, the sister who should have loved you. That loss is real and deserves to be mourned." She was right. Despite everything, part of me grieved. The little girl who'd once looked up to her strong, big sister, the daughter who'd craved parental approval, the family member who'd believed that enduring pain was the price of belonging. All those versions of myself needed acknowledgement before I could let them go. Physical therapy showed more progress. My fingers could now grip with 70% of normal strength. The nerve regeneration continued steadily. Mark celebrated each milestone, holding a pen properly, opening a jar, typing without adaptive equipment. My body was relearning trust in its own capabilities. "Your shoulder stability is improving too," he noted. "You're unconsciously protecting it less. Your body is learning it doesn't need to be ready to dislocate at any moment." The morning of sentencing arrived gray and drizzly, matching the somber mood. The courthouse steps were once again packed with media, but this time I walked through them with confidence. The truth had been spoken. Today was about consequences. The courtroom filled quickly. Sarah's supporters had dwindled to a handful of gym friends who still believed she was wrongly convicted. Our parents sat in their usual spot, Mom clutching Dad's arm like a lifeline. They'd aged years. In 2 weeks, their perfect suburban facade crumbling under public scrutiny. Sarah entered in shackles again, but something had changed. The defiance had dimmed, replaced by what looked like confusion. Prison had forced her into therapy, and perhaps reality was beginning to penetrate her worldview. Judge Matthews called the session to order, beginning with victim impact statements. I'd written mine carefully, wanting to convey not just the physical damage, but the psychological toll of decades of abuse. Standing at the podium, I spoke directly to Sarah. "You broke my bones, but you didn't break my spirit. You taught me that strength meant causing pain, but I learned that real strength is choosing not to perpetuate violence. You said you were making me stronger, but you were only making yourself feel powerful by hurting someone who couldn't fight back." I described the medical consequences, the surgery, the therapy, the permanent vulnerability in my shoulder. But I also spoke about hope healing and the community that had rallied around truth. "I spent 28 years believing I deserved pain for existing," I concluded. "Now I know I deserve the same thing every human does: safety, respect, and love that doesn't leave bruises." Emma gave her statement next, describing the trauma of witnessing abuse and being unable to stop it. Former clients' detailed injuries dismissed as pushing limits. Mrs. Chen spoke about the day she'd found me in her garden, broken and desperate. The prosecution presented evidence of Sarah's lack of remorse, recorded jail calls where she still insisted she'd done nothing wrong, letters to supporters claiming victimhood, refusal to engage meaningfully with therapy until forced. Then came a surprise. Aunt Patricia had asked to give a statement. She took the podium with visible nervousness, but her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I watched my mother break my sister's spirit the way Sarah broke Amy's bones," she said. "Patricia, my sister, learned that love meant control and violence meant caring. She passed that poison to her daughters. Sarah perfected it with modern fitness training, but the sickness is generational." She looked at Mom. "Patricia, we survived our mother by becoming her. Sarah followed that path, but Amy broke the cycle. She refused to let violence be her inheritance. That takes more strength than any amount of muscle could provide." Mom's sobs echoed through the courtroom. Dad stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Sarah watched her aunt with something like recognition dawning in her eyes. Hoffman made a plea for leniency, citing Sarah's athletic achievements, her previously clean record, her potential for rehabilitation. He painted her as a product of generational trauma who needed help, not incarceration. Janet countered with the severity of the crimes, the decades of abuse, the complete lack of remorse until forced by circumstance. She reminded the judge of Sarah's attempt to intimidate me after arrest, her continued minimization of the violence, the risk she posed to others in positions of vulnerability. Judge Matthews took a brief recess before pronouncing sentence. When she returned, her expression was grave but resolved. "Miss Mitchell." She began addressing Sarah directly. "The evidence presented shows a pattern of calculated violence spanning decades. You used your physical strength and family position to systematically torture someone who trusted you. When confronted with consequences, you showed no genuine remorse, only anger at being held accountable." She paused, letting the words sink in. The generational trauma referenced in this case is tragic but not exculpatory. Many people suffer childhood abuse without becoming abusers themselves. You had choices. You chose violence. For the crime of aggravated assault causing bodily harm, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. For assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, 5 years to run concurrently. You'll serve a minimum of 5 years before being eligible for parole. The courtroom erupted. Mom wailed. Dad stood abruptly and stormed out. Sarah's supporters gasped, but Sarah herself remained still, staring at the judge as if trying to process the words. Additionally, Judge Matthews continued, "Upon release, you're barred from any profession involving physical training, supervision of minors, or positions of physical authority over others. You'll complete mandatory therapy addressing violence and control issues. Any violation of these terms will result in immediate return to custody." As officers prepared to lead Sarah away, she suddenly spoke. "Amy." I met her eyes across the courtroom. "I still don't understand," she said, voice small and confused. "I thought I was helping. I thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I really believed I was making you stronger." "I know," I replied quietly. "That's the saddest part of all this. You convinced yourself that torture was love. But Sarah, love doesn't break bones. It doesn't require blood. It doesn't feed on fear. I hope someday you learn the difference." They led her away, no longer the invincible athlete, but a broken woman beginning to glimpse the horror of her actions. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but a profound sadness for the sister I'd never had the relationship poisoned before it could bloom. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy reached new heights, but I had one more thing to say. This case has exposed an ugly truth about how our society minimizes sibling abuse. I told the assembled reporters. We tell children that violence from brothers and sisters is normal, just kids being kids. We ignore escalating patterns because addressing them would disrupt family comfort. Today's sentence says that abuse is abuse regardless of who commits it. No one has the right to break another person, not even family, especially not family. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects continued. Support groups for sibling abuse survivors formed across the country. Legislative proposals emerged to better protect children from family violence. Training programs for teachers, doctors, and coaches incorporated recognition of sibling abuse patterns. My own transformation was quieter but no less profound. Physical therapy restored most function to my arm. The surgical scars faded to thin silver lines. My shoulder learned to trust its own stability instead of being ready to dislocate. More importantly, I learned to exist without apology, to take up space without shrinking, to disagree without fearing violence, to trust that love didn't require payment in pain. I returned to work, moved into my own apartment, rebuilt friendships that had withered under family dysfunction. Book club became a true joy again, discussing stories without the shadow of Sunday dinners looming. Julia and the others had stood by me throughout the trial, reminding me that chosen family could be stronger than blood. Emma visited regularly, our relationship evolving from cousin and protector to true equals. She was applying to law school, inspired to become a prosecutor specializing in family violence cases. Her documentation had saved me, but it had also given her purpose. Mrs. Chen remained my anchor, though I no longer needed her guest room. We gardened together on weekends, her wisdom gentle but profound. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me when bad days came. Some days you'll feel strong. Others, the old fears return. Both are part of the journey. Mom tried to contact me once, leaving a voicemail that I saved, but couldn't bring myself to play for weeks. When I finally did, her words were predictable. I destroyed the family, ruined Sarah's life, brought shame on the Mitchell name. But underneath the anger was something else, bewilderment that her carefully constructed world had collapsed. I didn't respond. Some bridges once burned weren't meant to be rebuilt. 6 months after sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Janet's office. Sarah's handwriting shaky but recognizable. Amy, prison therapy is mandatory, but I'm trying to actually engage with it. It's hard. Everything I believed about strength and weakness, about our family, about myself, it's all wrong, isn't it? I dream about that Sunday dinner. In the dreams, I stop when you scream. I help you get medical care. I act like a sister should. Then I wake up in this cell and remember that I chose violence instead. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm beginning to understand the monster I became. The therapist says acknowledgement is the first step. It feels like trying to lift a weight I'm not strong enough for yet. I hope your arm healed properly. I hope you're building a life without fear. I hope someday I can become someone who deserves to be called your sister, Sarah. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. Maybe someday I'd be ready to respond. Maybe healing could happen for both of us. But for now, I was focused on my own transformation, from victim to survivor to thriver. The girl who'd learned to dislocate her own shoulder to minimize damage had become a woman who stood tall in courtrooms and spoke truth to power. The family that had tried to break me had instead forged something unbreakable, not through violence, but through the courage to finally say, enough. Sarah was serving her sentence in a concrete cell, but I was serving mine too. A life sentence of freedom from fear of chosen family of love that nurtured instead of bruised. It was a sentence I gladly accepted. The verdict had been guilty. The transformation was ongoing. And for the first time in 28 years, I was truly, completely, authentically free. 2 years had passed since that October Sunday when Sarah broke my arm for the last time. I stood in my own kitchen now preparing dinner for friends without flinching at sudden movements or apologizing for taking up space. The apartment was small, but mine decorated with plants Mrs. Chen had helped me propagate, and artwork chosen for joy rather than propriety. My right arm showed only faint surgical scars, thin silver lines that caught the light when I moved. Physical therapy had restored 95% function. Enough to type cook, hold a book, embrace friends without fear. The shoulder that once dislocated on command had stabilized, no longer ready to surrender at the first sign of pressure. "You're glowing," Julia observed from her perch at my breakfast bar, wine glass in hand. Book club had evolved into genuine friendship, the kind built on trust rather than proximity. "Therapy does that." I laughed, stirring the soup I'd made from Mrs. Chen's recipe. That and not being terrified in my own home. The doorbell rang and I felt only curiosity, not the old spike of panic. Emma entered with her girlfriend Sage, both carrying dessert from the bakery near their apartment. Law school was treating Emma well. She'd found her calling in advocacy and channeling the courage that had led her to document abuse into a career protecting others. "Guess who made law review?" Sage announced, proudly squeezing Emma's hand. We toasted Emma's achievement as more friends arrived. Marcus from physical therapy and his husband Jennifer, the paramedic who'd saved my arm, new colleagues from the non-profit where I now worked. My chosen family gathered not from obligation, but genuine affection. As we settled around the table I'd bought secondhand and refinished myself, conversation flowed naturally. No one walked on eggshells. Disagreements didn't escalate to violence. Laughter came easily unmarked by underlying cruelty. Amy's giving the keynote at the National Sibling Abuse Prevention Conference next month. Jennifer announced, making me blush. It's just sharing my story, I demurred. Your story changed laws, Emma corrected. 3 states have passed legislation recognizing sibling abuse as distinct from rivalry. Training programs exist because you spoke up. Own it. She was right. The ripple effects continued spreading. I'd testified before state legislatures consulted on training programs, become an inadvertent spokesperson for survivors who'd been silenced too long. It felt surreal. The girl who'd apologized for existing now had a voice people wanted to hear. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Garden tomorrow, the roses need deadheading. I smiled, confirming our standing Saturday date. She'd become the mother I'd needed, offering unconditional support without suffocation. Her garden remained my sanctuary, a place where growth happened quietly but persistently. Any word from your parents? Marcus asked gently. He'd seen enough abuse survivors in his practice to understand the complicated grief of losing family who still lived. Dad sent a birthday card last month. No message, just his signature. I shrugged. Mom, nothing. I heard they moved to Florida, started over where nobody knows their story. And Sarah. She writes sometimes. The letters came sporadically from prison, each one showing incremental progress in understanding her actions. She's working through the program, seems to be taking it seriously. The parole board denied her first application. She needs to demonstrate sustained change, not just compliance. Would you want her released? Sage asked curiously. I'd wrestled with that question extensively in therapy. I want her to genuinely understand why her actions were wrong and commit to never hurting anyone again. Whether that happens in 3 more years or 10 healing can't be rushed. Speaking of healing, Jennifer raised her glass. I have news. Remember my sister Melissa? We knew the story. The sister who died from abuse Jennifer couldn't prevent. It had bonded us, initially, 2 women carrying different versions of similar grief. I'm starting a foundation in her name. Free emergency medical transport for domestic violence victims, no questions asked, no insurance required. Jennifer's eyes shone with purpose. Amy, would you consider being on the advisory board? Of course, I said immediately. Melissa's memory deserves that honor. The evening continued with stories of growth and recovery. Marcus shared how my case had changed his approach to treating abuse survivors. Emma discussed her law review article on documenting family violence. Each person around the table carried their own struggles and triumphs, bound together by choice rather than chance. As they prepared to leave, hugs were exchanged freely, something I couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. Touch had been weaponized for so long that reclaiming it as comfort took conscious practice. Now I embraced friends without bracing for impact. Emma lingered after the others left, helping with dishes in companionable silence. Finally, she spoke. I need to tell you something. Aunt Patricia reached out. She wants to reconnect with you. Mom's sister, who'd testified about generational abuse. We'd had no contact since the trial, both needing space to process family trauma. What do you think? I asked. She's been in intensive therapy, seems genuine about breaking the cycle, but... Emma trailed off. But trust takes time to rebuild, I finished. Tell her I'm open to coffee in a public place, small steps. Emma hugged me tightly. You've come so far. That terrified woman I drove to the hospital, I barely recognize her in who you are now. After she left, I stood on my small balcony, city lights twinkling below. The girl who'd learned to make herself small now took up appropriate space. The woman who'd apologized for breathing now spoke to lawmakers and conferences. The victim who'd believed she deserved pain now helped others recognize they didn't. My phone displayed a notification, another message to the support group I moderated online. Hundreds of survivors finding voice-sharing stories, realizing sibling abuse wasn't normal or acceptable. Each testimony added weight to the truth we'd been gaslit into doubting. I thought about Sarah in her cell wrestling with the programming that said violence equaled love, about our parents in Florida probably still insisting they'd done nothing wrong, about Grandma Patricia and the generations before who'd passed down poison disguised as strength. But I also thought about Emma documenting truth when everyone else looked away, about Mrs. Chen offering refuge without judgment, about Jennifer turning grief into action, about every person who'd said, "This isn't right," when family violence was easier to ignore. The cycle had broken with me, not cleanly or easily, but definitively. No child of mine would learn to dislocate joints to avoid worse damage. No sibling would grow up believing torture built character. The inheritance of violence stopped here. My arm ached slightly. Phantom pain from the old break aggravated by weather changes. I flexed my fingers, watching them respond with hard-won coordination. These hands that Sarah had tried to destroy now typed, "Survivor Resources signed legislation testimony held friends in comfort." They wrote a different story than the one she'd tried to impose through force. Tomorrow would bring challenges: therapy to continue processing trauma, work at the nonprofit supporting other survivors, maybe coffee with Aunt Patricia cautiously building bridges where possible, the keynote speech to prepare sharing hope with those still trapped in silence. But tonight I stood free. Free from fear of footsteps, from apologizing for existence, from believing pain was the price of family. Free to choose love that nurtured relationships, that supported a life that flourished. Sarah had broken my arm that Sunday, but she'd accidentally given me something precious, the catalyst for transformation. Without that final violence, I might have endured forever, accepting crumbs of conditional love seasoned with bruises. Instead, rock bottom became foundation for rebuilding. The city hummed below, millions of lives intersecting in chosen patterns. Somewhere among them were others like me, survivors finding voice-building chosen families, refusing to perpetuate cycles of harm. We were connected by shared understanding, mutual support, collective refusal to accept violence as love. I went inside, locking the door with satisfaction rather than fear. Tomorrow would come with its own complexities, but tonight I was safe in a home I'd created, surrounded by evidence of a life rebuilt on my own terms. The girl who'd cried in Mrs. Chen's garden was gone, evolved into someone stronger than Sarah's violence could ever produce. Not strength from breaking others, but from surviving breaking and choosing to heal. Not power from domination, but from lifting others as I climbed. My phone buzzed with a final message from the support group. "Thank you for showing us it gets better. 2 years free from abuse because your story gave me courage to leave." I smiled, typing back words I'd needed to hear decades ago. "You deserve safety. You deserve peace. You deserve love without bruises. Keep going. It really does get better." And it had. Against all odds, despite everything designed to break me, it had gotten immeasurably, impossibly, wonderfully better. The broken arm had healed. The broken spirit had soared. The broken cycle would never restart. This was my new beginning, and I claimed it with both hands, scarred but steady, gentle but strong, forever free from the grip of those who confused violence with love. To those who recognize themselves in Amy's story, your pain is real. Your experiences matter. Speaking truth isn't betrayal, it's survival. If someone is hurting you, especially someone who claims to love you, please reach out for help. You deserve safety, respect, and love that doesn't leave bruises. Share your thoughts. Has this story changed how you view sibling relationships or family violence? What signs might you now recognize that you wouldn't have before? If this story resonated with you, please like and share it. Every share might reach someone who needs to know they're not alone, that their pain isn't normal, and that healing is possible. Subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of family survival and the courage to speak truth. Together, we can break the silence that enables abuse and build communities where everyone is safe. Thank you for witnessing Amy's journey. May you find the strength to tell your own truth, whatever that might be. Remember, real love doesn't break bones, and real strength isn't measured in someone else's pain. You deserve better. We all do.